The thing about Konoha was that everybody smiled. The merchants smiled when they shortchanged you. The academy instructors smiled when they skipped your name during roll call, pretending they'd simply forgotten. The Anbu perched on rooftops smiled behind their porcelain masks. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it, that particular smugness of people who believed they were better than you by virtue of birth, bloodline, and the simple luck of not having a demon sealed inside their gut on the day they came screaming into the world. Naruto Uzumaki had studied those smiles for 12 years. Every single one. He'd cataloged them the way other children collected trading cards or pressed flowers. The tight-lipped smile of the grocery woman on 5th Street, who always charged him triple for expired milk. The pitying smile of the 3rd Hokage, who patted his head and gave him an allowance and acted like that made up for everything. The nervous smile of Uruka-sensei, who genuinely tried, but still flinched sometimes when Naruto moved too fast or laughed too loud. And then there was the smile Naruto wore himself. Big, bright, stupid, the grin of a happy idiot who didn't understand why people threw rocks at his window. The ear-to-ear beam of a class clown who pulled pranks because he was desperate for attention, not because he was mapping the patrol routes of every chunin in the village. The clueless, sunny, utterly brainless smile of a dead-last loser who couldn't even perform a basic clone jutsu. That smile was his masterpiece. Naruto adjusted it now as he walked through the morning market, hands shoved in the pockets of his orange jacket, shoulders slouched in that particular way that made adults look right through him. 2 women at a vegetable stall glanced his way and their faces did that thing, that involuntary tightening around the eyes, the way you'd look at a stray dog that might be rabid. "Morning," Naruto called out, waving like an idiot. They looked away, didn't respond. One of them pulled her child closer. Naruto's smile didn't waver. Inside, behind the grin and the slouch and the idiot act, something cold and patient took note. 3rd Street vegetable vendor. 2 children, both under 6. Husband works gate duty, rotation B. She closes the stall at sundown, walks home along the canal path. Alone, he didn't plan to do anything with that information. Not today. Probably not ever. But he collected it anyway, the way a spider spins web-weather or not a fly is coming. Because information was the only currency the village hadn't figured out how to deny him. The academy was a 15-minute walk from his apartment, but Naruto always took 30. He used the extra time to observe, to think, to be someone other than the loudmouth brat the village expected. These morning walks were the closest thing he had to freedom, those quiet minutes where he could let the mask slip, just slightly, and feel the cool morning air on his real face. His real face didn't smile much. The streets of Konoha were beautiful, he supposed, if you were the type to notice beauty. Cherry blossom trees lined the main avenue, their petals drifting down like pink snow. The Hokage monument loomed above everything, 4 stone faces staring out over the village with expressions of stern benevolence. His father's face was up there, though nobody had ever told him that. He'd figured it out on his own, the way he'd figured out most things, by watching, listening, and being consistently underestimated. The 4th Hokage, the village's greatest hero. The man who sealed the 9-tailed fox into his own newborn son and then died, leaving that son to grow up despised by the very people his sacrifice had saved. Naruto had worked out the timeline when he was 9. It wasn't hard. His birthday was the same day as the fox attack. He looked exactly like the 4th. The 3rd Hokage got a specific kind of sad every time Naruto asked about his parents, not the sadness of ignorance, but the heavy, guilty sadness of a man keeping a secret he knew was wrong to keep. 9 years old, and he'd cracked the biggest secret in the village, while the adults around him still thought he couldn't read past a 2nd grade level. He could, of course. He'd been sneaking into the civilian library since he was 6, reading everything he could get his hands on during the hours when the librarian, a thin woman with perpetually pursed lips who'd once accidentally locked him in the basement overnight, was on her lunch break. History, politics, chakra theory, psychology. Especially psychology, understanding how people thought was the most dangerous weapon in the world. Naruto had figured that out long before he'd ever thrown a kunai. He reached the academy gates and let the mask settle fully into place. Shoulders up. Grin wide, eyes bright and vacant, he bounced on his heels, the picture of restless, undirected energy. Hey, Kiba, did you do the homework? I totally forgot, believe it. Kiba Inuzuka turned from where he'd been scratching Akamaru behind the ears and gave Naruto that look, half annoyed, half amused. You always forget, man. What's even the point of asking? Maybe I'm hoping you'll let me copy yours. My homework's worse than yours. Ask Sakura. Naruto let out an exaggerated groan and slumped against the gate. Kiba laughed and walked inside, already losing interest. That was the thing about the idiot persona, people never looked twice. They saw what they expected to see, heard what they expected to hear, and moved on with their lives, never once wondering if the dead last had read more books than every student in their year combined. The classroom was filling up. Naruto took his usual seat, third row from the back, far left, next to the window. Most people assumed he sat there because he liked staring outside and daydreaming. In reality, the seat gave him a clear sightline to the door, the instructor's desk, and every other student in the room, while keeping his own face in partial shadow from the morning sun. If he angled his body right, he could raid whatever he wanted beneath his desk without anyone noticing. Today, though, he wasn't reading. Today he was watching. Specifically, he was watching Ino Yamanaka. She'd arrived about 5 minutes after him, flanked by Sakura Haruno, the two of them bickering about something as usual, their voices carrying that particular frequency of competitive friendship that was half genuine affection and half mutual antagonism. Ino tossed her pale blonde ponytail over her shoulder, said something cutting that made Sakura's face go red, and then swept to her seat with the casual confidence of a girl who'd never once doubted her place in the world. Naruto watched her settle in. Watched how she arranged her things. Notebook centered, pen to the right. A small purple flower she'd picked on the walk to school placed carefully on the corner of her desk, like a tiny declaration of identity. Watched how she interacted with the people around her. A wave to Shikamaru. A teasing comment to Choji about the chips he was already eating before first bell. A cool nod to Sasuke that lingered just a half-second longer than casual. She was, Naruto reflected, exactly what the village wanted its children to be. Confident, social, connected. A Yamanaka through and through, pretty, sharp-tongued, and possessed of the unshakable self-assurance that came from growing up in a clan that loved you, trained you, and told you every single day that you were special. Must be nice. He crushed that thought the moment it surfaced. Envy was noise. He couldn't afford noise. The reason he was watching Ino had nothing to do with envy or attraction or any of the sentimental nonsense that drove most 12-year-olds. It was much simpler than that. 3 days ago, during a taijutsu exercise in the training yard, Uruka-sensei had asked Ino to demonstrate a basic technique from her clan's repertoire. A simple sensory exercise, nothing flashy. She'd formed the hand signs her father had taught her, pressed her fingers together in that distinctive oval shape the Yamanakas used, and sent a pulse of chakra toward a training dummy rigged with a detection seal. The seal had lit up. Basic stuff. Ino had looked bored by it. But Naruto hadn't been watching the dummy. He'd been watching Ino's chakra. Not with his eyes, he didn't have a Jujutsu, and he thanked whatever gods existed for that, because special eyes made people pay attention to you, and attention was the last thing he wanted. No, he'd felt it. The particular flavor of her chakra as it extended outward. The way it moved, not like a weapon, not like a shield, but like a hand, reaching, probing, searching for something to hold on to, mind transfer chakra. The Yamanaka clan's signature technique. The ability to leave your own body and enter someone else's, to puppet them, to see through their eyes and move their limbs and think their thoughts. It was. Naruto had realized with a calm that surprised even himself, exactly what he needed. not the Yamanaka technique itself. That was crude, temporary, and left your own body vulnerable. No, what he needed was the principle behind it, the understanding of how chakra could interface with the human mind, how consciousness could be touched, influenced, reshaped. Because 3 weeks before that, Naruto had found something in the dark. The tunnels beneath the Hokage monument were not on any map. Naruto had discovered them by accident, or what felt like accident, though he sometimes wondered if the fox had nudged him there, some subconscious pull toward darkness and buried things. He'd been 12, running from a group of drunk chunin who decided that the anniversary of the fox attack was a good night to remind the demon brat of his place, and he ducked into a crack in the rock face at the base of the monument that he'd never noticed before. The crack led to a passage. The passage led to stairs. The stairs led down, deep beneath the village, into a network of tunnels carved from the bedrock itself. The walls were covered in seals, old ones, faded and cracked, their chakra signatures so ancient they barely registered. Naruto had followed them in the dark, one hand trailing along the cold stone, until he'd found the room. It wasn't large. Maybe 15 feet square, with a low ceiling and a stone floor worn smooth by footsteps that had stopped coming decades ago. There was a desk, real wood, not stone, somehow preserved by the seals that covered every surface. A chair and scrolls. Dozens of scrolls, stacked in cubbies carved into the walls, each one sealed with a tag that bore a symbol Naruto didn't recognize. A spiral overlaid with what looked like a stylized brain, rendered in ink that had once been red but had faded to the color of old rust. He'd spent 3 weeks working on the seal tags before he cracked them. They were designed to shock anyone who tried to open them without the right chakra signature. But Naruto had more chakra than anyone in the village, maybe more than anyone alive, and a healing factor that let him absorb the shocks and keep trying. By the end of the 3rd week, his fingers were scarred, and his chakra control had improved more than in 3 years of academy training, and the first scroll lay open before him. It was written in a clinical, precise hand. No name on it, but the author referred to themselves occasionally in the 3rd person as the researcher. The date on the earliest entries placed them during the Second Shinobi World War, a time when every village was desperate for any advantage, and ethics were a luxury no one could afford. The researcher had been a Yamanaka. Or at least, they'd started as one. The early entries described standard clan techniques, mind transfer, mind reading, mental communication. But as the entries progressed, they became something else entirely. The researcher had been obsessed with a question. Why does the mind transfer jutsu require the user to leave their own body? It was, they argued, a fundamental design flaw. You wanted to control someone's mind, but to do it, you had to abandon your own body, leaving it defenseless. It was a technique born from philosophy, not warfare. The Yamanaka clan's original jutsu had been developed for communication, for understanding, for healing. Using it as a weapon had always been an afterthought, a crude adaptation of something meant for gentler purposes. The researcher wanted to fix that. They wanted a mind jutsu that didn't require you to leave your body. One that could reach across the space between 2 people, sink into the target's brain like roots into soil, and reshape what it found there. Not possession, not puppetry, conversion. The scrolls documented years of experiments. Animal subjects first, lab rats whose behavioral patterns were rewritten, dogs who turned on their masters, hawks that forgot how to fly and had to be taught again from scratch. Then, as the war ground on and prisoners of war filled the camps beneath Konoha, human subjects, Naruto had read those entries with a stillness that might have been horror in someone else. In him, it was something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that the world was exactly as brutal as he'd always suspected, and that the village that called him a monster had been birthing real monsters long before he was born. The researcher's human experiments had produced results. Crude ones, at first, subjects who lost motor function, who forgot language, who screamed until their throats bled. But incrementally, experiment by experiment, the technique was refined. The final entries described a method for what the researcher called deep integration, a way to weave foreign chakra into the neural pathways of a target's brain so thoroughly that the target couldn't distinguish the implanted thoughts from their own. The key was subtlety. You didn't blast your way into someone's mind. You seeped. A tiny amount of chakra, delivered through physical contact, a handshake, a pat on the shoulder, a brush of fingers. So small the target would never notice. That chakra would settle into the brain like sediment in a riverbed, building up layer by layer over days, weeks, months. Each deposit carried an instruction, not a command, because commands could be resisted, but a suggestion. A gentle nudge in a direction the target was already inclined to go. You've always found him interesting, haven't you? He's not so bad, really. People are unfair to him. You want to help him. It feels right. It feels like your own idea. The brilliance of it, and Naruto used that word with full awareness of its weight, was that the technique didn't override a person's will. It recruited it. The target's own mind did most of the work, rationalizing the implanted suggestions, building elaborate justifications for feelings and behaviors that hadn't existed a week before. The human brain was desperate for coherence, the researcher had noted. Give it a new thread, and it would weave it into the existing tapestry so seamlessly that the target would swear it had always been there. The researcher's work had been discovered eventually. The final scroll entry was abrupt, a single line, written in a hand that shook slightly. They're coming. The work must survive, even if I do not. The seals on the room had held for decades. The researcher's colleagues had presumably been told the work was destroyed. And there it had sat, in the dark beneath the monument, waiting for someone desperate enough, patient enough, and broken enough to find it and understand it. Naruto had found it. Naruto understood it, and for the first time in 12 years, Naruto had smiled for real. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Naruto had returned to the underground room every night, studying the scrolls until his eyes burned and his chakra ached. The technique was complex, far beyond anything taught at the academy, beyond most Jonin-level jutsu in terms of the precision it required. But Naruto had 2 advantages no one else in the village possessed. First, his chakra reserves were effectively limitless. The fox saw to that. While other shinobi had to budget their chakra like a finite resource, Naruto could practice a technique 1,000 times without tiring. The researcher's notes emphasized that the implantation jutsu required extremely fine chakra control, the opposite of Naruto's natural inclination. But control was just a skill, and skills could be trained. He'd spent entire nights doing nothing but channeling the tiniest possible thread of chakra through his fingertips, over and over, until he could produce a filament so fine it was invisible even to sensor types. Second, and this was the part that made his stomach clench with something that wasn't quite excitement and wasn't quite dread. The fox's chakra had unique properties when it came to mental influence. The researcher hadn't known about Jinchuriki, or if they hadn't documented it. But Naruto had discovered through experimentation that when he laced his chakra threads with the barest trace of the fox's energy, the threads became sticky. They bonded to neural tissue faster, integrated more deeply, and were exponentially harder to detect or remove. It was as if the technique had been designed for him. As if the universe, having spent 12 years taking everything from Naruto Uzumaki, had decided to hand him the one weapon that could take everything back. He'd tested it on animals first, the same way the researcher had. Stray cats in the alley behind his apartment, a dog that wandered too close to the training grounds. The results were immediate and terrifying. A cat that had hissed at him one day was purring in his lap the next, following him with the devoted, glassy-eyed affection of an animal that had simply decided, on its own, that this human was its entire world. He'd killed the cat afterward. Not out of cruelty, he'd been surprisingly gentle about it, a quick snap of the neck, painless, but because a stray cat suddenly following Naruto Uzumaki around would draw attention. The dead last demon brat didn't get to have things that loved him. People would notice. People would ask questions. And Naruto could not afford questions. Not yet. The technique worked on animals. The next step was obvious, inevitable, and something Naruto had been circling in his mind for days with the careful, deliberate focus of a predator choosing its approach angle. He needed a human subject. And not just any human. He needed someone whose mind was already trained in mental techniques, someone whose neural pathways were developed, whose chakra coils in the brain were robust enough to handle the integration without breaking down. The researchers' notes were very clear on this point. Untrained minds were fragile. Push too hard and you got vegetables, not agents. A subject with mental training, though someone from a clan that specialized in psychic techniques, would be able to absorb the integration smoothly, their developed infrastructure acting like a highway system for the implanted chakra. The Yamanaka clan was the only game in town. And Ino Yamanaka was 12 years old, already trained in basic mental techniques, and this was the part that Naruto found almost amusing in its irony. She had absolutely no idea he existed, not really. She knew his name, the way everyone knew the class clown's name. She'd laughed at his pranks a couple of times, rolled her eyes at his outbursts, and occasionally told him to shut up when he was being too loud near her precious Sasuke. But she'd never once looked at him and seen a person. He was scenery, background noise. The dead last loser who wasn't worth a second thought. That was about to change. Uruka-sensei was talking about chakra nature transformations, and most of the class had that specific glazed look. That meant they'd stopped listening about 10 minutes ago. Naruto had his chin propped on his hand, eyes half closed in a performance of drowsiness, while his actual attention was laser-focused on the girl 6 seats to his right. Ino was taking notes. Actual notes. She was one of the few students who bothered, along with Sakura, and when he felt like it, Shikamaru. Her handwriting was neat, her posture was straight, and every few minutes she'd glance toward Sasuke's seat with an expression that mixed longing and competitive determination in roughly equal measure. Sasuke Uchiha. The other boy the village had broken, though in a different way. Naruto had considered targeting Sasuke first, the last Uchiha, the boy with the precious bloodline, the village's favorite damaged orphan. But Sasuke's mind was a fortress of trauma and rage, sealed tight by grief and the Sharingan's influence on neural architecture. Cracking him would take too long, be too risky, and draw far too much attention. The village watched Sasuke the way hawks watched their young. Nobody watched Ino. Not like that. She was loved, yes. Protected, certainly. But she was also normal, a clan heir, sure, but one of many. The Yamanaka, Nara, and Akimichi clans were respected but not revered the way the Uchiha or Hyuga were. Ino was expected to grow up, take over the flower shop, lead the clan, and marry some appropriate shinobi. She was important, but not important. That made her perfect. The bell rang for lunch, and the classroom erupted into the controlled chaos of 30 12-year-olds who'd been sitting still for 4 hours. Naruto stretched, yawned enormously, and made a big show of nearly falling out of his chair, earning a snicker from Kiba and an eye roll from Sakura. He grabbed his lunch, instant ramen in a thermos, because it was cheap and he liked the routine of it, and headed for the academy yard. Most students clustered in their usual groups, the clan kids together, the civilian-born kids in their own orbit, the loners at the edges. Naruto usually ate alone on the swing near the big oak tree, maintaining the image of the ostracized outcast. Today, though, he deviated. He walked past Ino's group. She was sitting on the stone bench near the flower garden, of course, the flower garden, with Shikamaru sprawled in the grass beside her and Choji working through his second bag of chips. They looked comfortable, settled. The kind of easy friendship that came from years of shared history and clans that had been allied for generations. Naruto tripped. It was a good trip, not cartoonish, not obvious, just a slight catch of his sandal on a raised stone that sent him stumbling forward. His thermos flew from his hand, hit the ground, and rolled directly into Ino's ankle. Oh, what the Naruto? Sorry. He scrambled to pick up the thermos, all flailing limbs and embarrassed grinning. Totally didn't see that rock. I'm such a klutz, sorry, Ino. You're always a klutz, she said, rubbing her ankle with more drama than the slight bump warranted. Watch where you're going. My bad. He grabbed the thermos and, in the process of standing up, reached out and steadied himself on her arm, just for a second. Just long enough for his fingers to press against the bare skin between her elbow and her sleeve. He pushed, not much. The tiniest filament of chakra he could produce thinner than a hair, laced with just a breath of the fox's energy. It left his fingertip, passed through her skin, and disappeared. The whole transfer took less than a heartbeat. Ino didn't react. How could she? It was like trying to feel a single grain of sand added to a beach. Her body's natural chakra flow absorbed the thread and carried it inward, toward her brain, where it would settle and begin its quiet, patient work. Seriously, Naruto, can you just go eat your ramen somewhere else? Ino waved him off, already turning back to her friends. Right, yeah, going, sorry again. He retreated to his swing, thermos in hand, grinning like the fool everyone expected. Shikamaru was watching him. Not with suspicion, just with that half-lidded, perpetually bored gaze that was the Nara boy's default expression. But he was watching, and that was enough to make Naruto file the observation away. Shikamaru Nara was smart. Everyone knew it, even if the boy himself seemed determined to waste his intelligence on cloud-watching and competitive napping. His IQ was off the charts, over 200, if the academy records Naruto had snuck a look at were accurate. He was lazy, unmotivated, and chronically allergic to effort, but when something caught his attention, he saw things other people missed. Naruto would have to be careful around him. He sat on the swing, ate his ramen, and reviewed the interaction. Contact had been made. The first thread was in place. Now he had to wait. The researcher's notes specified a minimum of 24 hours for the initial thread to integrate before the next one could be applied. Too much too fast, and the target's natural chakra defenses would flag the foreign presence. Patience was everything. Patience and access. He needed to be near Ino regularly without it seeming unusual. In the academy, that was easy enough. They were in the same class, shared the same training exercises, moved through the same spaces. But the academy year was almost over. Graduation was in a few weeks, and after that, they'd be assigned to different three-man cells. He'd lose daily access unless he could create a reason to maintain contact. He was already working on that problem. Several solutions presented themselves, each with its own risks and rewards. But for now, the first thread was planted, and the clock was ticking. Naruto finished his ramen, crushed the thermos into his bag, and looked up at the sky. Blue and clear and indifferent. Somewhere above him, his father's stone face stared out at the village, blind and mute, the hero who'd condemned his son to hell with a seal and a prayer. You wanted me to be their protector, Naruto thought. You should have protected me first. He let the thought go. Sentimentality was noise. He had work to do. The afternoon training session was Jutsu, sparring in the academy yard under Uruka's supervision and the watchful eye of Mizuki-sensei, who served as assistant instructor and who Naruto trusted about as far as he could throw the Hokage monument. Mizuki was the kind of man who smiled too easily and helped too readily, and whose kindness always came with a hook buried in it. Naruto had clocked him within the first week of academy, the way Mizuki's eyes lingered on certain students, the way his encouragement was designed to build dependency rather than confidence. He was grooming someone for something, though Naruto hadn't yet figured out what. A problem for another day. Today's sparring was randomized, names drawn from a hat, old-fashioned and theoretically fair, though Naruto had noticed that certain matchups seemed to happen more often than chance should allow. Today, the universe, or Uruka's hand in the hat, handed him Shino a burame. Good. Shino was quiet, methodical, and not the type to chat during a fight. Naruto could lose convincingly without expending much effort. He let Shino take him down in 3 minutes, making it look like he'd put up a spirited but ultimately hopeless fight. The right amount of struggle, not so little that it looked fake, not so much that it made people think he was actually trying. Iruka gave him a consolation pat on the shoulder, and a better luck next time that was sincere enough to make something behind Naruto's ribs ache very slightly. He ignored it. He'd gotten good at that. From his spot on the ground, pretending to be winded, he watched the other matches. Sasuke dismantled Kiba with clinical efficiency. Sakura lost to Hinata in a match that was closer than anyone expected. Choji and Shikamaru were paired together and produced the laziest fight in Academy history, ending in a mutual forfeit after 30 seconds of half-hearted grappling. And then Ino fought. Her opponent was a civilian-born girl named Ami, a bully with more aggression than skill, who'd been tormenting quieter students since first year. Ino dismantled her in under a minute, not with flashy moves or overwhelming power, but with precision. She read Ami's attacks before they came, sidestepped with an economy of movement that spoke to real training, and put her down with a sweep and a pin that Iruka awarded without hesitation. Naruto watched from his sprawl in the dirt and reassessed his target for the 100th time. Ino was good. Not Sasuke good, not even Hinata good in terms of raw combat ability, but she was smart about fighting in a way that most of their classmates weren't. She didn't waste energy. She didn't showboat. She saw what was in front of her and responded to it with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been trained by people who actually knew what they were doing. The Yamanaka clan's taijutsu wasn't famous. They were known for their mind techniques, their intelligence work, their flower arrangements. But Inoichi Yamanaka had been a jonin, a member of the legendary Ino Shikacho trio, and he'd clearly taught his daughter the fundamentals with a thoroughness that most parents didn't bother with for academy-age kids. Naruto added this to his mental file. Ino was not going to be easy. Her mental defenses would be more developed than a civilian's, her awareness of chakra manipulation more acute. One wrong move and she'd feel the intrusion, tell her father, and the whole thing would unravel before it began. Good. Easy targets broke too quickly. After training, the class filed back inside for the final lecture, history, which Iruka delivered with genuine passion and which Naruto absorbed while pretending to sleep. Today's lesson was about the founding of the village, the alliance between the Senju and Uchiha clans, the dream of a world where children didn't have to fight. How'd that work out? Naruto thought, watching his classmates' children, every one of them, being trained to kill for a village that would use them up and throw them away the moment they stopped being useful. When the final bell rang, he was the first one out the door, moving with the desperate energy of a kid who couldn't wait to escape. He ran 3 blocks, ducked into an alley, checked that he wasn't being followed, and then stopped running. The manic energy dropped from his body like a discarded coat. His breathing was already even. He hadn't actually been exerting himself. He walked the rest of the way to the Hokage monument at a measured pace, taking a circuitous route through the residential district. He passed the Yamanaka flower shop on the way, deliberately, because the route was useful even if it added 10 minutes. The shop was open, warm light spilling through the windows onto the street. Through the glass, he could see a tall man with long blonde hair arranging flowers behind the counter. Inoichi Yamanaka. Ino's father, former head of the intelligence division, a man who could crack open a human mind like a walnut and read every secret inside it, the most dangerous man in the village as far as Naruto's plans were concerned. Inoichi looked up as Naruto passed. Their eyes met through the glass for just a moment. The man's expression did something complicated. Naruto saw recognition, discomfort, pity, and something that might have been guilt flash across those pale blue eyes in quick succession. Naruto gave him the big, stupid grin. Waved, kept walking. Inoichi's gaze lingered on his back. Naruto could feel it, not chakra sense, just the animal awareness of being watched that 12 years of hostility had honed to a razor's edge. The weight of it sat between his shoulder blades for a full block before it lifted. He knows what I am, Naruto thought. The fox, I mean. He knows and he feels bad about it, and that guilt will make him hesitate at exactly the wrong moment. Guilt was useful. Guilt made people slow. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden behind a cluster of boulders at the western base of the monument, in a spot that was technically restricted, but only lazily patrolled. Naruto had memorized the patrol schedule weeks ago, one chunin, rotating on a 40-minute cycle, who spent most of his shift reading a romance novel behind a supply shed 50 meters from the actual perimeter. Naruto slipped through the crack in the rock, formed a small ball of chakra in his palm for light, one of the few techniques he let himself use openly, since it wasn't technically a jutsu and didn't require hand signs, and descended. The tunnels were cool and silent. His footsteps echoed off stone walls covered in faded seals, and the air smelled like old dust and something faintly metallic that he'd never been able to identify. The path to the researcher's room was seared into his memory, left at the first junction, straight past the collapsed passage, right at the seal that looked like an eye, down 2 flights of worn stairs. And through the door that wasn't a door, but a section of wall that responded to a specific chakra pulse. The room greeted him with its familiar dimness. Naruto lit the oil lamp on the desk. He'd brought it down weeks ago, along with a bedroll, water, and enough instant ramen to last a siege, and settled into the chair. Tonight's study was focused on the researcher's notes about progression, the specific sequence of implanted suggestions that would, over weeks, build a target's loyalty from scratch. The researcher had been meticulous about this, documenting the psychological stages with a clinical detachment that Naruto found almost comforting in its lack of sentimentality. Stage 1 was what the researcher called noticing. The first few threads didn't carry complex suggestions, they simply made the target more aware of the user's presence. Suddenly, you'd notice someone you'd previously overlooked. Your eyes would find them in a crowd. You'd remember things about them that you'd normally forget. It was so subtle it felt entirely natural, just a shift in attention, the kind of thing that happened all the time without any jutsu at all. Stage 2 was reframing. Once the target was noticing the user, the implanted threads would begin to gently reshape the target's emotional associations. Negative feelings, discomfort, dislike, indifference, would be slowly overwritten with curiosity, sympathy, and interest. The target would begin to see the user in a new light, find excuses for their behavior, attribute positive qualities to them that they hadn't noticed before. Again, nothing that couldn't happen naturally. The genius of the technique was that it mimicked organic emotional development so perfectly that even a trained mind reader would have difficulty distinguishing it from genuine change of heart. Stage 3 was bonding. The target would begin seeking out the user's company, sharing personal information, feeling a growing sense of connection and loyalty. This stage was where the researcher warned the most about patience. Push too fast, and the target's subconscious would rebel, creating cognitive dissonance that could manifest as headaches, mood swings, or in extreme cases, a complete psychological break. Slow and steady. Let the target's own mind do the heavy lifting. Stage 4 was dependence. The target's sense of self would begin to orbit the user. Their priorities would shift. They'd start making decisions based on what the user wanted, often without being asked. This was the most dangerous stage, dangerous for the user, because a target this deeply integrated might start exhibiting behavioral changes obvious enough for outside observers to notice. Stage 5 was integration. The final stage, where the target's original personality was fully subsumed by the implanted architecture. At this point, the target would do anything the user asked, not because they were being controlled, but because they genuinely, completely, absolutely believed they wanted to. Their old self would be walled off in some deep corner of their mind, still alive but unable to influence behavior. A passenger in their own body. 5 stages. The researcher estimated the full progression took between 3 and 6 months for a trained mind, longer for untrained ones. Naruto, with the fox's chakra enhancing his threads, thought he could compress the timeline. Maybe 2 months. Maybe less, if Ino's Yamanaka training made her neural pathways as receptive as he hoped. 2 months. 60 days to turn one of Konoha's most promising young kunoichi into his devoted agent, and through her, gain access to the Yamanaka clan's entire library of mind techniques. And then, well, then the real work could begin. Naruto pulled a blank scroll from his pack and began writing. Not the researcher's work. He'd memorized that already. These were his own notes, his own modifications. The researcher had been a Yamanaka working with standard chakra. Naruto was a Jinchuriki working with something far more potent, and the technique needed to be adjusted accordingly. He wrote for 3 hours, pausing occasionally to practice the finger movements, the precise chakra molding required to produce threads fine enough for implantation. His control was getting better. 2 weeks ago, his thinnest thread had been the width of a sewing needle. Now it was closer to a human hair. He needed it finer still, spider silk, then thinner, until it was nothing but intent given the barest physical form. Around midnight, he stopped. His eyes ached, his fingers were cramped, and the lamp was running low on oil. He rolled up his notes, sealed them with a tag of his own design, keyed to his chakra and the fox's, impossible for anyone else to open without destroying the contents, and placed them in the cubby with the researcher's scrolls. He sat for a moment in the dimming light, looking at the walls of the little room. This place had been someone's life's work. Someone had sat in this chair at this desk and devised a technique that could reshape the human mind. And then they'd been caught, and presumably killed, and their work had been buried here in the dark. The village had done that. The same village that had created the technique in the first place during a war it had fought to protect itself. Konoha made weapons and then destroyed the weapon makers when the war was over, pretending the weapons had never existed. Pretending they were civilized. Pretending they were the good guys. Naruto understood the researcher, he realized. Not just their work, but their anger. The cold, patient fury of someone who had given everything to a village that would throw them away the moment they became inconvenient. He snuffed the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to his own breathing and the faint, ever-present rumble of the fox behind its seal. The fox never spoke to him in words, not yet, not at this level of the seal, but sometimes he felt its awareness like standing next to a furnace. It was watching. It was interested. Go ahead and watch, Naruto thought. You might learn something. He left the tunnels the way he'd come, emerging into a night that was cool and clear and full of stars. The village slept around him, thousands of people in their warm houses with their families and their normal lives, dreaming normal dreams. Naruto walked home through empty streets, hands in his pockets, face a blank mask in the darkness where no one could see. Tomorrow he'd go back to the academy. He'd grin and shout and flail and fail, and everyone would see exactly what they expected. The dead last. The demon brat. The boy too stupid to be a threat. And beneath their notice, one invisible thread at a time, he would begin to take everything they'd never given him. The next morning came bright and warm, and Naruto arrived at the academy early. Unusual enough that Uruka did a double-take when he walked in, but not so unusual that it warranted comment. He'd chosen his timing carefully. Early enough to be in the classroom before most students arrived, but not so early that it would seem deliberate. He needed to observe Ino's morning routine up close. She arrived at her usual time, 8:47, 3 minutes before the bell, walking with Sakura in that particular formation they favored, side by side but slightly turned toward each other like flowers angled at the same sun. Today the argument was about Sasuke's hair. It's not gel, it just does that naturally, Ino was insisting. The Uchiha have amazing hair genetics. That's not a thing, Ino. It absolutely is a thing. Have you seen his mother in photos? Flawless. You're insane. You're jealous. They split at the classroom door, Sakura going left to her seat, Ino going right to hers. As she passed Naruto's row, he caught the faintest whiff of something floral. Not perfume, she was 12, she didn't wear perfume, but something from the shop. Lilac, maybe. the scent of a girl who spent her afternoons surrounded by flowers. He tracked her with his peripheral vision as she sat down, watching for any sign that yesterday's thread was taking effect. It was too early, probably. The first thread needed 24 hours to fully integrate, and it had been only about 20. But the researcher had noted that particularly receptive subjects sometimes showed early signs. There. It was tiny, so small that no one who wasn't looking for it would ever have noticed. As Ino arranged her desk, her gaze swept the room in its usual morning survey. She looked at Shikamaru eye roll, affection, Choji small smile, Sasuke lingering, longing, and then her eyes passed over Naruto's section of the room and, for just a fraction of a second, stopped. Not on him. Not exactly. More like her attention snagged on his general area, the way your eye might catch on a color you didn't expect. A half-second pause, and then she moved on, her expression unchanged, already looking at something else. But she'd looked. Yesterday, she wouldn't have. Stage 1. Noticing. Naruto kept his face slack and bored, staring out the window at nothing. Inside, the cold thing in his chest purred. The morning dragged in the way mornings always did when you were waiting for something. Iruka's lessons, Mizuki's commentary, the rustle and murmur of 30 children who would rather be anywhere else. Naruto performed his role, inattentive, disruptive, dumb. He answered a question wrong on purpose, earning laughter from the class and a sigh from Iruka. He doodled on his notebook. He stared out the window, and he waited for lunch. When the bell finally rang, he moved with calculated casualness. Instead of heading straight for the yard, he detoured to the bathroom, timed his exit to coincide with Ino leaving the classroom, and then fell into step behind her group at a distance that was close enough for proximity, but far enough to avoid seeming intentional. In the yard, he needed another touch, another thread. But the same method, tripping near her, would look suspicious if repeated so soon. He needed variety. The opportunity came from an unexpected direction. Mizuki-sensei appeared in the yard carrying a box of training equipment, wooden kunai, practice shuriken, padded sparring gloves, and announced that the afternoon session would be starting early due to a schedule change. Everyone pair up for throwing practice. Grab a partner, grab equipment, let's move. The yard dissolved into the chaotic scramble of students trying to partner with their friends. Naruto saw his opening. Kiba grabbed Shino. Sakura lunged toward Sasuke. Choji turned to Shikamaru. Ino was left without a partner for exactly 3 seconds. Naruto materialized beside her with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who'd been left out. Ino, you want to partner up. Everyone else is taken. Her expression flickered through several phases. Annoyance, resignation, and there, barely visible, a tiny flash of something that wasn't quite interest, but wasn't quite dismissal either. The thread at work, softening her automatic rejection just enough. Fine, she said, with the air of someone making a great sacrifice. But if you hit me with a shuriken, I'm telling my dad. I'll try not to. No promises, though. My aim's pretty bad. It wasn't. His aim was excellent. He'd been practicing alone for years, in training grounds the other students didn't use, during hours the village was asleep. But Ino didn't need to know that. They set up at the throwing range, side by side. Mizuki distributed the practice shuriken, blunted, but heavy enough to sting. 10 throws each, alternating. Focus on form, not power. Naruto threw first. He made it look sloppy. Too much wrist, not enough elbow, and the shuriken wobbled off course, missing the target by a wide margin. He groaned dramatically. Your stance is all wrong, Ino said, and there was a note of real exasperation in her voice, the kind of irritation that came from watching someone do something badly when you knew how to do it well. You're turning your whole body. It's a wrist throw. Like this, he demonstrated, wrong again. No, like here. She reached out and grabbed his wrist, adjusting his position. Her fingers were warm and precise, the touch of someone who'd been corrected the same way by her own teacher 100 times. Elbow in. Snap from here. He let her adjust him, feeling the warmth of her hand on his skin, and gently, so gently, pushed another thread through the contact. a whisper of chakra carrying the faintest suggestion. He's trying. That's kind of endearing, isn't it? Ino's hand lingered for just a moment, then dropped. She stepped back, crossed her arms, and watched him throw. He made this one better, not great, but noticeably improved. The shuriken hit the outer ring of the target. "See," Ino said, and there was the tiniest shade of satisfaction in her voice. "Not hopeless." "Thanks, Ino." "You're a pretty good teacher," she shrugged, already turning to take her own throw. "Just don't tell anyone I helped you. I have a reputation." Her throw was perfect. Center target, clean release, textbook form. She turned back to him with a smirk that dared him to comment. "Wow," Naruto said, and for once, the admiration in his voice wasn't entirely performed. "That was awesome." Something shifted in her expression. Just a flicker, a tiny crack in the armor of cool indifference she wore like a second skin. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since they'd been assigned to the same class 4 years ago. "Thanks," she said, and then, as if surprised by her own sincerity, she added quickly, "Now throw, you're up." They practiced for 20 minutes. Naruto let himself improve gradually under her corrections, each one requiring physical contact. She adjusted his grip, his stance, the angle of his shoulder. Each touch was another opportunity, another thread, another whisper. "She's not like the others. She actually helped you." It felt good to be noticed, didn't it? "She has nice eyes." You never realized that before. By the end of the session, Naruto had implanted 4 additional threads, bringing the total to 5. The researcher recommended no more than 3 per day for the first week, but the fox's chakra made the threads more efficient, and Ino's trained mind was absorbing them without the slightest sign of resistance. Her Yamanaka neural pathways were doing exactly what he'd hoped, acting as a highway system, carrying the implanted chakra deeper and faster than an untrained brain would. She wouldn't feel anything today. Maybe not tomorrow. But within a few days, she'd start noticing Naruto more. Finding herself thinking about him at odd moments. Wondering, idly, what his deal was. Why he tried so hard. What was behind that big, dumb grin, and she'd think it was all her own idea. After school, Naruto performed his usual routine, ran 3 blocks, ducked into an alley, dropped the mask. But instead of heading straight for the monument, he detoured. He needed supplies. Not from the regular shops. Those either overcharged him or refused to serve him entirely. There was a particular store on the edge of the merchant district, run by an old man named Takeshi who was half-blind and fully indifferent to village politics. Takeshi sold tools, equipment, and basic supplies at fair prices to anyone with money, and he didn't ask questions. Naruto bought a small notebook, high-quality paper, the kind that took ink without bleeding, a set of brushes, and a bottle of sealing ink. The old man rang him up without comment, handed over the bag, and went back to reading his newspaper. No glares, no muttered insults. Just commerce, clean and simple. It was the closest thing to normal human interaction Naruto experienced on a regular basis, and he was careful not to ruin it by going there too often. On his way out, he passed the Yamanaka flower shop again. This time, Ino was inside. She'd beaten him there from the academy, probably taking the more direct route. He could see her through the window, standing behind the counter, tying a bundle of red carnations with purple ribbon. Her father was in the back room, visible through the doorway, working on something Naruto couldn't see. Ino looked content, settled, at home in a way that Naruto had never been anywhere. She was humming something, her fingers moving with practiced ease among the stems and petals, and the afternoon light caught her hair and turned it to pale gold. Naruto watched for maybe 5 seconds. Then he kept walking. He didn't feel anything about what he was doing to her. He'd checked, probed his own emotional state with the same clinical detachment the researcher had applied to their subjects, and found nothing. No guilt, no excitement, no sadistic pleasure, just the calm, steady focus of someone working toward a goal. Maybe that should have bothered him. Maybe the absence of feeling was itself a symptom of something broken. But Naruto had been broken for 12 years, and the village had never cared about fixing him, so he didn't see why he should care about fixing himself. The tunnels welcomed him with their cool silence. He lit the lamp, sat at the desk, and opened his new notebook. On the first page, he wrote a single line in the personal code he'd developed, a cipher based on the fox's seal pattern, unbreakable by anyone who didn't know the key. Day 1. 5 threads implanted. No adverse reaction observed. Subject appears receptive. Estimated time to stage 2, 5 to 7 days. He paused, pen hovering over the page. Then he added, she has a good throwing arm. He stared at that line for a long moment. Then he crossed it out, clean and deliberate, and closed the notebook. Irrelevant data. Noise. He couldn't afford noise. The lamp flickered. The tunnels hummed with the deep, old silence of buried things. And somewhere above him, in a flower shop filled with warmth and color and the effortless love of a father who would do anything to protect his daughter, Ino Yamanaka finished tying her carnations and thought, for no reason she could name, about the boy with the big grin who couldn't throw a shuriken to save his life. Funny, she thought. I never really noticed him before. She shook her head, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and reached for the next bundle. The thought settled into her mind like a seed in good soil and began, so quietly, to grow. 3 days passed. Naruto added threads each day, 2 on the second day, 3 on the third, carefully distributed across brief, seemingly accidental contacts. A bump in the hallway. A shared supply box during calligraphy class. A moment during outdoor training where he asked to borrow her canteen because he'd forgotten his. Each contact lasted less than 2 seconds. Each thread carried its whispered suggestion, so faint and so perfectly calibrated to Ino's existing neural patterns that her chakra system accepted them the way lungs accepted air, automatically, invisibly, without a single alarm. By the morning of the 4th day, Naruto could see the changes. They were small. To anyone not looking for them, they'd be invisible. Just the natural, random fluctuations of a 12-year-old girl's social behavior. But Naruto was looking, and what he saw confirmed that the technique was working exactly as designed. Ino greeted him in the hallway. Not a big greeting. Not a dramatic change. Just a "Hey, Naruto," as she passed his desk, dropped casually between her hello to Shikamaru and her wave to Choji. As if he'd always been part of that sequence. As if acknowledging his existence was the most natural thing in the world. He responded with his usual overenthusiastic grin. "Hey, Ino, love the flower today?" She'd put a small yellow daisy on her desk. She looked at the flower, then back at him, and something warm flickered across her face. "Thanks. It's from the new shipment. Dad says the supplier switched to a better greenhouse." That was 2 sentences of voluntary conversation. 2 days ago, her response would have been a nod at most. The threads were working, gently expanding the space Naruto occupied in her attention, turning him from background noise into not a friend, not yet, but a presence. Someone she noticed. Someone she spoke to without thinking about it. Stage 1 was completing ahead of schedule. Shikamaru, 3 seats away, watched the exchange with his chin on his hand and said nothing. But his eyes, lazy, half-lidded, and sharper than any blade in the Academy's weapons cabinet, tracked Naruto for a long moment after Ino had turned away. Naruto caught the look, smiled wider. Let his eyes go vacant and dumb. Shikamaru looked away, muttering something about everything being troublesome, and the moment passed, but it had happened. The smartest kid in class had noticed something, even if he didn't know what yet. A tiny anomaly in the pattern. Ino Yamanaka, who had never given Naruto Uzumaki the time of day, suddenly including him in her morning routine. 1 data point wasn't a pattern. Shikamaru would need at least 3 before his analytical mind started spinning. That gave Naruto a window, but not a large one. He'd have to be more careful. Slower. Let the changes happen so gradually that even Shikamaru's genius would dismiss them as normal social drift. Or, and this was the thought that had been growing in the back of Naruto's mind for 3 days, the thought he'd been trying to ignore because it complicated things. He could do something about Shikamaru, not the same technique. Naruto wasn't ready to run 2 simultaneous integrations, And Shikamaru's mind was a different beast entirely. That Nara intelligence was a natural fortress, all lateral thinking and pattern recognition. The mental equivalent of trying to sneak past a security system that was always watching from unexpected angles. But there were other ways to handle a threat. Misdirection, misinformation, giving Shikamaru something else to focus on, something more interesting than Ino's shifting social patterns. Naruto filed the problem for later consideration and returned to being the worst student in class. The morning evaporated. Lunch came. Naruto ate on his swing, alone as always, and watched the yard. Ino was sitting with her usual group, but today she'd chosen a spot on the bench that faced, barely, subtly, probably unconsciously, in his direction. Not toward him, just not away from him. A tiny rotation of her body's orientation that shifted him from behind her to within her peripheral vision. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her brain was doing the work on its own now, the implanted threads having trained her attention to keep a passive awareness of his location. Like knowing where the sun was without looking at it, Naruto bit into his rice ball and chewed thoughtfully. 4 more days, he calculated. Then stage 2. He'd need to increase the frequency of their interactions for that. Stage 2, reframing, required more substantial contact, conversations rather than bumps and brushes. He needed her to start thinking about him when he wasn't there, to carry her awareness of him home at night, to let it color her quiet moments. The researchers' notes had suggested several methods for accelerating stage 2 contact: shared tasks, study groups, training partnerships, anything that created a context for prolonged proximity without arousing suspicion. Naruto thought about this as Iruka called the class back inside, turning the problem over in his mind with the patient, methodical focus that was his real gift, not chakra, not techniques, but the ability to see a system and understand how to make it work for him. By the time the afternoon bell rang and the class poured out into the golden end-of-day light, he had a plan. Tomorrow was the Academy's monthly skills assessment, the comprehensive test that evaluated everything from written knowledge to practical jutsu to physical conditioning. Most students crammed for it the night before, gathering in study groups at each other's houses or in the library. Naruto had never been invited to a study group. Of course he hadn't. But tomorrow's test had a component he could use: the paired assessment, where 2 students were graded on their ability to coordinate during a simulated tactical exercise. Partners were assigned randomly, or at least theoretically randomly. Iruka kept the partner list on his desk. The academy locked up at 6. Iruka left at 5:30. There was a window on the 2nd floor that didn't latch properly. Naruto had discovered this during one of his many detentions, when he'd spent an afternoon supposedly writing lines and actually mapping every exit, entrance, and structural weakness in the building. Tonight, after dark, he would visit the academy. And tomorrow, by pure coincidence, Naruto Uzumaki and Ino Yamanaka would be assessment partners. He walked home through streets that were starting to cool as the sun dropped behind the monument, and his shadow stretched long and thin behind him, reaching back toward the academy like a dark hand. In his apartment, small, cold, bare of everything that made a place feel lived in, he changed out of his orange jacket, ate a cup of instant ramen standing over the sink, and waited for nightfall, the village quieted by degrees. Shops closed. Families gathered for dinner. Lights came on in windows, yellow and warm, framing scenes of normalcy that Naruto had watched from the outside his entire life. A mother ladling soup, a father helping with homework, children laughing at something on television. He didn't press his face to the glass anymore. He'd stopped that years ago. Around the same time, he'd stopped crying and started watching. At 10:15, he left his apartment through the window, not the door, because the hallway had a civilian neighbor who'd reported his late-night movements to the landlord twice already, and moved across the rooftops with a speed and silence that would have shocked anyone who thought they knew him. His building-to-building movement was self-taught, refined through years of escaping mobs and evading curfew patrols. He'd never taken the academy roof-running course seriously, deliberately fumbling the exercises while his classmates laughed. But alone, in the dark, with no audience to perform for, he moved like water. The academy was dark and locked. Naruto dropped to the second-floor window ledge, tested the latch, still broken, still neglected, and slipped inside without a sound. He paused, crouching in the empty hallway, and extended his senses. No one. The building was dead. Uruka's desk was in the main classroom. The partner list for tomorrow's assessment was in the top drawer. Naruto had watched Uruka place it there during last period, the instructor's hand lingering on the drawer in that absent way people touched things they planned to retrieve later. The drawer wasn't locked. Why would it be? Who would break into the academy to tamper with a partner list? Naruto opened the drawer, found the list, and scanned it by the moonlight coming through the windows. His name was paired with Shino Aburame. Ino's was paired with Sakura. He studied the list for a moment, then pulled a blank sheet of paper from his bag. The same weight, same texture as the academy's standard stock, purchased from Takeshi's shop for exactly this purpose. He reproduced the list in a perfect imitation of Uruka's handwriting, changing only 2 pairings, Naruto with Ino, Shino with Sakura. Everything else stayed the same. He'd practiced Uruka's handwriting for months. The instructor left enough graded papers lying around that Naruto had been able to study every quirk. The slight leftward lean, the oversized loops on certain characters, the way the brush strokes thickened when Uruka was writing quickly verses carefully. The forgery was flawless. Even Uruka wouldn't notice. Naruto placed the new list in the drawer, pocketed the original, and closed it with a soft click. He'd destroy the original later, burn it in the tunnels, scatter the ashes. He paused at the window on his way out, looking back at the dark classroom. 30 desks in neat rows. An instructor's podium. A chalkboard with tomorrow's date written in the corner. The place where Konoha shaped its children into weapons and called it education. I could have been different, he thought, and the thought surprised him with its clarity. If one person, just one, had seen me, really seen me, not the fox, not the orphan, not the dead last, just me, the thought was warm, and warm things were dangerous. He crushed it, slipped out the window, crossed the rooftops, disappeared into the dark. Tomorrow came, and with it, the assessment. Uruka read the partner list aloud after first period, and Naruto watched Ino's face when their names were called together. A flicker of surprise, a slight furrow of the brow, and then, there, barely visible, a softening, not displeasure, not enthusiasm, just acceptance, tinted with something that, if you were generous, you might call curiosity. A week ago, she'd have groaned. She'd have protested, asked Uruka to switch, made it clear that being paired with the class dead last was beneath her. The threads had changed that. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Naruto Uzumaki had moved from ugh to okay, I guess, in her internal hierarchy, and she had no idea it wasn't her own choice. Guess we're partners, Naruto said, sliding into the seat next to her with his usual graceless energy. I'll try not to drag you down too much. Ino looked at him. Up close, in the direct morning light, her eyes were a pale, striking blue, lighter than his own, almost gray at the edges. She studied him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read, and then she smiled. It was a small smile. Controlled, the smile of someone deciding to make the best of a situation. But it was real, and it was directed at him, and somewhere deep in the machinery of Naruto's mind, something he'd thought long dead twitched. Just keep up, Ino said. I'm not failing because you can't throw straight. Hey, I've been practicing. You'll see. We'll see, she corrected, but the smile didn't drop, and when she turned to face front as Uruka began explaining the assessment parameters, she didn't angle her body away from him. Naruto settled into his seat, adjusted his grin, and began planning his next move. The assessment would give them an hour together. 60 minutes of legitimate, supervised, unavoidable contact. Enough time for conversation, for connection, for the kind of shared experience that builds rapport faster than weeks of casual interaction. Enough time for a dozen more threads. Stage 2 was about to begin. And Ino Yamanaka, smiling at a boy she'd never noticed before, had no idea that the ground beneath her was already shifting. Chapter 2, Base, he caught something. Not a full signature, Naruto's suppression was too good for that, but a residual trace. A ghost of chakra lingering in the air around the crack in the rock. The faint afterimage of someone who'd been channeling energy in a place where no one should have been channeling anything. Tadashi stopped. Naruto, pressed flat against the rock face 10 feet above, watched him through a gap in the boulders. The Chunin's head turned slowly, scanning, his hands forming a half-seal to boost his sensing range. His eyes narrowed. He could feel something. He couldn't identify it, couldn't pinpoint it, but he knew with the bone-deep certainty of a trained sensor that something wasn't right. He took a step toward the boulders. Then another. Naruto calculated. The Chunin was 3 meters away and closing. If he reached the crack, he'd find the entrance to the tunnels. If he found the tunnels, he'd report it. If he reported it, Anbu would investigate. If Anbu investigated, they'd find the researcher's room, the scrolls, the notes. Everything. 2 options. Let him find the entrance and hope the investigation went nowhere. Or stop him. The first option was unacceptable. Anbu was thorough, and the tunnels were directly beneath the Hokage monument, a security concern that would trigger a full sweep regardless of what they found inside. Naruto's entire operation would be exposed before it began. The second option was simple. The calculations took less than a second. The moral weight of what he was about to do took even less. Not because Naruto didn't understand what killing meant. He understood it perfectly, with the cold clarity of someone who'd been studying death since he was old enough to read about it. He understood that Tadashi Miura was a person with a life, a history, people who would miss him. He understood that ending, that life was irrevocable, absolute, and wrong by every standard the village claimed to uphold. He understood all of that, and he did it anyway. He dropped from the rock face in silence, landed behind Tadashi, and struck. One blow to the base of the skull, delivered with a chakra-enhanced palm strike that the academy would never have taught him, but that the researcher's notes on combat applications had described in clinical detail. Tadashi's body went rigid, then limp. He crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Still alive. Naruto checked the pulse, thready, irregular, fading. The blow had disrupted the brain stem. Death would follow within minutes, but minutes were too long. The man might wake, might scream, might be found before Naruto could establish the scene. Naruto picked up the body. It was heavier than he'd expected. Dead weight was different from live weight, and he wasn't physically strong by shinobi standards. But the fox's chakra was there, always there, a vast reservoir of power that responded to need the way water responded to gravity. He drew on it just enough to augment his muscles and carried Tadashi Miura to the river. The river was 50 meters from the monument base, running through Training Ground 7 in a deep, rocky channel. Naruto placed the body face down in the shallows, positioning it against a cluster of submerged rocks so the head wound would be consistent with a fall. He removed his own sandals and walked in the water for 30 meters in each direction, eliminating footprints. He checked for blood. There was very little. The strike had been internal and washed the small amount from the rocks with river water. He checked the scene 3 times, looking for anything out of place, anything that would suggest this was more than a drunk man's accidental death. He found nothing. The scene was clean. Naruto put his sandals back on, climbed back to the monument, and disappeared into the tunnels. He sat at the researcher's desk, lit the lamp, and waited for his hands to shake. They didn't. He waited for the guilt, the horror, the revulsion. For some part of him to recoil from what he'd done, to insist that this was a line he shouldn't have crossed, that there was a difference between manipulation and murder. Nothing came. He felt exactly the same as he had before, calm, focused, deliberate. As if he'd completed a chore rather than ended a life. This is what they made me, he thought, looking at his steady hands in the lamplight. 12 years of hatred and neglect, and they're surprised when the product isn't human. He wasn't surprised. He'd known for a long time that something fundamental was missing in him, or had been removed, or had never been installed in the first place. The capacity for horror, for empathy, for the instinctive moral revulsion that stayed normal people's hands. Other kids his age were afraid of the dark, afraid of failure, afraid of being alone. Naruto was afraid of nothing, because fear required an attachment to something worth losing, and the village had made sure he had nothing except his plan. And his plan was intact. He opened his notebook and wrote a single entry, obstacle neutralized, scene staged, low probability of investigation. Continue operations. He didn't write Tadashi's name, the researcher would have approved. The death was reported 3 days later, processed through the standard shinobi casualty pipeline. Mission desk notification, next of kin contact, medical examination, case review. The medical examiner found blunt force trauma consistent with impact against submerged rocks. Blood alcohol content was 0, which was unusual given Tadashi's reputation, but the examiner attributed the sobriety to the man's recent attempt to quit drinking, an attempt well documented by his squad leader. A few people raised eyebrows. A sober man falling into a river was less plausible than a drunk one doing the same. But Training Ground 7's riverbank was steep and rocky, and accidents happened, and the village had more pressing concerns than investigating the death of a middling chunin with a drinking problem. The case was closed within a week. Tadashi Miura was added to the memorial stone, not the big one in the center of the village, reserved for those who died on missions, but the smaller one near the administrative building, where names accumulated like fallen leaves. His belongings were packed up. His apartment was reassigned. Naruto watched the process from the sidelines with professional interest, noting the speed of the investigation, the assumptions made, the gaps in the system that had allowed a murder to pass as an accident. Good data, useful for future reference. He hoped there wouldn't be a future reference. Killing was messy, risky, and drew attention even when it was done well. He vastly preferred manipulation. It was cleaner, more elegant, and left the subject alive to be useful later. But he demonstrated to himself that he was capable of it when necessary, and there was a cold comfort in knowing your own limits, or rather, in knowing you didn't have any. 10 days after the first thread was planted, Ino Yamanaka was solidly in stage 2. Naruto could track the progression with almost scientific precision. Her behavior toward him had shifted along exactly the axes the researcher had predicted, each change building on the last like stones in an arch. She noticed him. That was stage 1, complete and stable. Her attention now automatically tracked his presence in any shared space, classroom, training yard, hallway. He could see it in the way her eyes flickered to him when he entered a room, the way her body subtly oriented toward his position. She wasn't conscious of doing it. It was as natural to her as blinking. She was curious about him. The conversations had continued, not daily, not forced, but frequent enough that a pattern was establishing itself. Ino sought him out during free periods, fell into step with him in hallways, asked questions that probed the edges of his mask. She wanted to understand the gap between the class clown and the boy who could dodge chalk balls. And each conversation gave him an opportunity to feed her another carefully portioned piece of truth. And now, the reframing threads were taking hold, the new patterns were rewriting her emotional associations. The process was invisible and elegant, and Naruto tracked each microshift with the focus of a craftsman watching glaze cure on a pot. The sympathy induction was the most visible. Ino had always been empathetic. It was a Yamanaka trait, cultivated by a clan whose techniques required understanding other people's minds. But her empathy had been general, distributed evenly across her social circle. Now it was concentrating, narrowing. Focusing on Naruto with an intensity that colored her interactions with him in ways she probably didn't recognize. She'd started defending him, small things at first. When Kiba made a crack about Naruto's latest test score, dead last again, what a shock. Ino had shot back with a sharp. Maybe if the teachers actually taught him instead of ignoring him, his scores would be better. The comment had surprised everyone within earshot, including Ino herself. Naruto had seen the flash of confusion on her face, the quick blink of someone who'd said something unexpected and was trying to figure out where it had come from. The interest amplification was subtler but equally effective. Ino was thinking about him during idle moments. He could see the evidence in the way she sometimes looked at him with a slight furrow in her brow, the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She'd started paying attention to details. His clothes, she'd mentioned casually that orange wasn't really his color. His eating habits, she'd brought him a rice ball once, claiming she'd packed too much for lunch. His moods, she'd asked him once quietly if he was okay. After a day when the mask had slipped more than usual, the trust acceleration was the most dangerous and the most rewarding. Ino was starting to share things with him, small confidences, personal opinions, the kind of low-stakes vulnerability that marked the beginning of genuine trust. She told him about her rivalry with Sakura, how it had started as real friendship and curdled into something competitive and toxic. She told him about the pressure of being a clan heir, the expectations, the feeling that her entire life had been plotted on a map before she was born. She told him about her father. This was the information Naruto needed most, and he was careful not to show too much interest when she offered it. They were sitting on the academy roof. Ino had started joining him there during free period, climbing the maintenance ladder with a casualness that said she'd done it before, and looking out at the village. "Dad's been weird lately," she said, pulling petals from a flower she'd brought from the shop. "He keeps asking me about school, not like normal asking, like interrogation asking. You know the difference." "Can't say I do. Nobody asks me about school." She glanced at him. He'd said it lightly, but the truth landed. He could see it register. Another data point in her growing understanding of his isolation, another brick in the wall of sympathy the threads were building. "Right. Yeah," she pulled another petal. "Anyway, it's annoying. He does this thing where he listens to everything you say and then asks a follow-up question that's actually about something completely different. Like, he'll ask about my grades, and then somehow we're talking about who I eat lunch with. Sounds like an intelligence guy." "He is an intelligence guy. That's the problem. I grew up with that, so I can usually tell when he's doing it. But lately, it's like he's actually trying to find out something specific, and I can't figure out what." Naruto kept his face neutral while his mind raced. Inoichi was investigating. Not formally, Ino would have described something more structured if her father had launched an actual inquiry. This was parental concern, heightened by professional instinct. Inoichi had noticed changes in his daughter's behavior and was trying to identify the cause through the conversational techniques he used on intelligence targets. This was not unexpected. Naruto had always known that Inoichi would be the primary threat to the operation, a Yamanaka mind specialist who also happened to be the target's father. The man's emotional investment guaranteed vigilance, and his professional skills made that vigilance dangerous. But Ino's willingness to complain about her father's behavior told Naruto two important things. First, she didn't connect Inoichi's questions to Naruto specifically. She saw it as general parental nosiness, not targeted investigation. Second, the threads were creating enough distance between Ino and her father's influence that she was willing to share her frustration with an outsider rather than simply accepting her father's attention as normal. That distance would need to grow. Stage 3 would require Ino to start keeping secrets from her family, and for that to happen, her loyalty to her father had to be gently, gradually undermined, not destroyed. Naruto wasn't trying to make Ino hate her father. That would be too dramatic a change, too obvious. He just needed to redirect her trust, shift it from the people who would protect her to the person who was dismantling her. "Parents are weird," Naruto said, and the casual dismissiveness of the comment, coming from a boy who had no parents, who had never been asked about his day, who would have given anything for the suffocating attention Ino was complaining about, carried a weight that Ino felt even if she didn't fully process it. Her pedal-pulling paused. She looked at him sideways. "Yeah," she said softly. "I guess they are." They sat in silence for a moment, the village spread out below them, busy and bright and completely unaware. Then Ino shook herself, dropped the flower stem, and stood. "I should go. Shikamaru wants to practice formations for the team exercise next week." Team exercise. The three-man cell simulation. Uruka-sensei is testing team dynamics before graduation. They'll probably use it to influence the actual team assignments. She paused, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You should take it seriously. If you show what you can actually do, you might end up on a good team." "You think?" "I think you're wasting yourself, and it's starting to piss me off." She said it with genuine heat, not anger at him, but anger on his behalf. The threads had weaponized her natural empathy, turned her compassion into a blade pointed inward, cutting through the defenses she might have used to maintain healthy distance. She cared about him now. Not enough to call it attachment. Stage 2 wasn't that advanced, but enough that his self-sabotage had become personally offensive to her. Good. That was exactly where she needed to be. "I'll think about it," Naruto said, giving her a smile that was smaller and more real than his usual grin. A reward. A reinforcement. You gave the subject a piece of yourself when they gave you what you wanted, and what Ino had given him, emotional investment, information about her father, tacit commitment to his improvement, was worth a genuine smile. She left. He stayed on the roof, watching the clouds the way Shikamaru always did, and let his mind work. Inoichi is suspicious. Shikamaru is observant. The timeline needs to accelerate. He had perhaps 2 weeks before one of them moved from passive observation to active investigation. 2 weeks to advance Ino from Stage 2 to Stage 3, where her loyalty would be strong enough to survive external challenges, where she would defend her connection to Naruto even against her father's probing. 2 weeks. It wasn't enough time for organic progression. He'd need to push harder. The researcher's notes had described an accelerant, a technique for compressing the Stage 2 to 3 transition by triggering a bonding event. Something emotionally intense, a shared experience that would catalyze the target's developing loyalty into something more durable. The researcher had been vague about specifics, noting only that the event should feel significant to the target, that it should create a sense of shared vulnerability, and that it should position the user as either a protector or a partner. Naruto needed to create a crisis. Something that would throw him and Ino together under pressure, that would force her to rely on him, that would burn through the remaining barriers of Stage 2 like fire through paper. He thought about this for a long time, turning options over, discarding them, refining. By the time the afternoon bell rang and the academy emptied below him, he had a plan. It was dangerous. It required leaving the village, which meant navigating the gate system or finding an unmonitored exit. It required putting Ino in genuine physical danger, which raised the stakes beyond anything he'd attempted so far. And it required performing well enough to save her, which meant partially dropping the dead last mask in a situation where there might be witnesses. But the reward was worth the risk. A bonding event, a real one, visceral and terrifying, would catapult Ino into Stage 3 faster than months of careful threading. And once she was in Stage 3, the operation entered its final phase. Naruto climbed down from the roof and walked toward the village gates, already working out the details. The forest outside Konoha's walls was old growth, massive trees with trunks wider than houses, their canopy so thick that the forest floor existed in permanent twilight. The village used the closer sections for training, the middle sections for low-risk missions, and avoided the deeper sections entirely unless circumstances required it. The deeper sections were where the predators lived. Naruto had been mapping the forest for months, using his late-night excursions to push further from the village each time. He moved through it easily. The fox's chakra made him virtually invisible to most animal predators, who sensed something ancient and terrible in his signature and gave him wide berth. It was one of the few advantages of being a Jinchuriki that he actually appreciated. He was looking for something specific, and he found it in a ravine about 2 miles from the wall. A wild boar den. The boars that lived in the deep forest were not the domesticated animals kept by Konoha's farms. They were enormous, the largest standing chest-high to a grown man, and aggressive, with tusks that could gore through standard-issue armor. A single boar was a threat to a genin team. A family group was a threat to Chunin. The den held 4, a large male, 2 females, and a juvenile. Naruto observed them from a tree branch, noting their patrol patterns, their feeding schedule, the territorial boundary they maintained around the den. The male was the most aggressive, charging at anything that came within 50 meters. The females were protective of the juvenile, which made them unpredictable. He spent an hour studying them, then withdrew. He needed the boars alive and angry, which meant he needed to agitate them without injuring them. The plan required them to be a genuine threat when Ino encountered them. Close enough to the village that 2 academy students could plausibly stumble onto them during an unsanctioned training exercise, dangerous enough that the experience would be truly frightening. The next step was bait. Naruto spent the following morning collecting what he needed. Food scraps from the academy dumpster, a bloody rag from the butcher's waste bin, which required a pre-dawn visit, since the butcher would never have given it willingly, and a concentrated scent lure made from crushed wild herbs that the boar's diet made them crave. He'd learned the recipe from a trapping manual in the civilian library, one of the hundreds of practical skills he'd acquired during years of reading everything he could find. That afternoon, he laid a trail. Starting from the boar den, he placed scent markers at intervals leading toward the village, stopping at a clearing about half a mile from the wall, close enough to reach quickly, far enough to feel remote. He positioned the food scraps and the bloody rag at the clearing's edge, where the boars would find them and linger. The trail would take time to work. Boars were cautious, and the male would need to investigate each marker before committing to the next. Naruto estimated 24 to 48 hours before the family group relocated to the clearing. That gave him 1 day to set the stage. He needed Ino in the forest, near that clearing, at the right time. And it needed to seem like her idea. The next morning, Naruto arrived at the academy with a plan that was equal parts psychological manipulation and theatrical staging. He found Ino before first bell, catching her in the hallway between the entrance and the classroom. She was alone, Sakura hadn't arrived yet, and Shikamaru was presumably still in bed, as his chronic lateness was the one pattern Naruto never needed to analyze. "Hey, Ino, can I ask you something?" She stopped, shifted her bag on her shoulder. "Make it quick, I need to review my notes." "You know that advanced kunai technique you showed me? The wrist snap thing?" She hadn't shown him an advanced technique. She'd corrected his basic form, but the misremembering was deliberate, a small inflation of her contribution that would make her feel more invested in his progress. "I've been practicing it, but I can't get the release point right. I was thinking, would you maybe want to train with me after school? Not here, there's this clearing I found outside the wall, really open, good sight lines. Nobody goes there." He watched the offer land. Ino's expression moved through its calculations. The social risk of being seen training with the dead last, the inconvenience of the time commitment, the appeal of being asked for help by someone who'd shown surprising potential. The threads amplified the positive factors and dampened the negative ones, tipping the scale. "Outside the wall," she frowned slightly. "Students aren't supposed to leave the village without supervision." "I know, but the training grounds inside are always packed, and I don't want anyone seeing me mess up. It's embarrassing enough being the worst in class without an audience." The self-deprecation was strategic, but the vulnerability beneath it was real. He genuinely didn't want anyone watching him train, though for very different reasons than he was implying. Ino read the vulnerability, not the strategy, and her expression softened. "Fine," she said, in the tone of someone making a concession she'd already decided on. But if we get caught, I'm blaming you. Deal. Meet me at the south service gate after last bell. The one near the waterworks, it's never guarded during shift change. You know when the guards change shifts. I notice stuff, he grinned. Not everything, obviously. I still can't pass a written test to save my life, but gate schedules are easy. She studied him for a moment, that piercing, evaluative look that reminded him of her father, and then shook her head with a half-smile. You're weird, Naruto. The best kind of weird. Debatable. She walked into the classroom. Naruto followed at a distance, watching her settle into her seat. She pulled out her notebook, uncapped her pen, and then paused. Her gaze drifted toward his section of the room, caught on him, held for a beat, then released. She didn't seem to realize she'd done it. The day crawled. Naruto performed his usual routine, failed a pop quiz, fumbled a taijutsu exercise, stared out the window during Uruka's lecture on the history of the 5 great nations. Behind the mask, his mind was running logistics. The boars should have reached the clearing by now. He'd checked the trail markers early that morning and found the first 3 disturbed. The male had investigated, found the scent, and begun following. Given the spacing and the boar's typical movement rate, the family group would be in the clearing by mid-afternoon. Timing was everything. He needed to arrive at the clearing with Ino before the boars, position themselves in the open, and then let the encounter happen naturally. His role would be to protect her, to drop the dead last act just enough to demonstrate real competence, to put himself between her and danger, to create the kind of intense, fear-fueled bonding experience that the researcher had described. It would be dangerous. Wild boars were unpredictable, and Naruto was 12, and his actual combat skills, while significantly better than anyone suspected, were untested against real threats. If the male charged and Naruto couldn't stop it, Ino could be seriously hurt. He'd considered that. Weighed it against the operational necessity, decided the risk was acceptable. If he'd examined that calculation more closely, really examined it, the way a therapist or a father or a decent human being might, he would have found something troubling in how easily he'd reduced another person's physical safety to an acceptable variable in an equation. But Naruto didn't examine it closely. He was very good at not examining things closely. It was, in its own way, a survival skill. Last bell rang. Students poured out. Naruto moved quickly, reaching the south service gate in under 5 minutes. It was a small maintenance entrance used by the village's infrastructure workers, plumbers, electricians, the occasional mason. And it was, as he'd told Ino, unguarded during the shift change that happened at 3:15 every day. Ino arrived at 3:12. She'd changed out of her academy clothes into a training outfit, dark shorts, a sleeveless top, her hair pulled into a tighter ponytail than usual. She'd brought a kunai holster, which she wore on her right thigh with the easy confidence of someone who'd been handling weapons since childhood. Ready? Naruto asked. I can't believe I'm doing this, she muttered, but she was smiling. The slight thrill of rule-breaking, of adventure, of doing something outside the prescribed boundaries of her carefully structured life. The threads amplified the excitement, dampened the caution. They slipped through the gate at 3:16, a minute after the shift change, and entered the forest. The trees swallowed them immediately. Inside the canopy, the light dropped to a soft green twilight, and the sounds of the village faded within 50 meters, replaced by birdsong, wind, and the deep silence of old wood. Ino's pace slowed involuntarily. She was a village girl, trained in the academy yard and her family's indoor dojo, and the forest was not her territory. Naruto, who'd been navigating these woods for months, adjusted his pace to match hers. He let her set the direction, toward the clearing, which he described in enough detail that she could find it on her own, reinforcing the illusion that this was a place he'd visited casually rather than a carefully prepared stage. They walked for 15 minutes, talking. The forest created a natural intimacy, low light, close quarters, the shared vulnerability of being outside the village walls. Ino's guard was lower than usual, her conversation more open. Can I ask you something personal? she said, ducking under a low branch. Shoot. Do you really live alone? Like completely alone. Since I was 4, the orphanage kicked me out when, he paused, constructing the hesitation. In reality, he'd rehearsed this story dozens of times. Well, you know how some people feel about me. The matron felt that way too. You were 4. Yep. Ino was quiet for several steps. The forest rustled around them. When she spoke again, her voice had a quality he'd never heard in it before, not pity, which he would have hated and which the threads would have rejected, but a quiet, fierce anger. That's messed up, she said. You were a little kid. You were 4 and they just threw you out. It wasn't that dramatic. The Hawkage got me an apartment. There's a stipend. It's fine. It's not fine, Naruto. None of that is fine. He looked at her. In the green forest light, her pale eyes were dark with an emotion he could have manufactured through the threads, but hadn't needed to. This was real. Organic. Ino Yamanaka was genuinely angry on his behalf, and it had nothing to do with implanted chakra. The voice in the back of his mind, the one he kept trying to kill, whispered, "She's a good person. A really, genuinely good person, and you're leading her into a trap." He ignored it, pointed ahead. There's the clearing. The clearing was a roughly circular gap in the canopy, maybe 40 meters across, carpeted in thick grass and wildflowers. Afternoon sunlight poured through the opening, turning the space warm and golden after the cool green of the forest. It was, objectively, beautiful. Ino's face softened when she saw it. Okay, I'll admit it. This is a nice spot. Told you. Good sightlines, plenty of room to practice. What do you think? She was already scanning the clearing with a Kunoichi's trained eye, checking the perimeter, noting exits, assessing the ground surface. Her father's training again, running beneath conscious thought like a background program. She wouldn't have found anything alarming. The boore sign, droppings, trampled grass, tusk marks on bark would be at the clearing's far edge, near the food scraps Naruto had placed, and they weren't visible from the entrance. Let's warm up first, Ino said, dropping her bag at the clearing's edge. Basic forms, then throwing practice. I want to see your stance without the audience excuse. They warmed up. Naruto let himself be better than his academy persona, but worse than his real ability, a middle ground that would impress Ino without alarming her. He ran through basic taijutsu forms with decent but imperfect execution, and Ino corrected him with the brisk confidence of someone who'd been born to teach. Hips square. Weight on your back foot. No, your other back foot. You have 2 of them, Naruto. Pick the right one. Sorry. Stop apologizing and start listening. He listened. Or performed listening, which amounted to the same thing. Her hands were on him constantly, adjusting his shoulder, tapping his knee to widen his stance, pressing his elbow into alignment. Each touch was an opportunity for threads, and he used them sparingly, planting 2 over the course of 20 minutes. Both carried stage 2 reframing patterns, sympathy induction and trust acceleration, woven together into a double helix of artificial emotion. You trust him. You don't know why, but you do. Something about him feels safe. His life has been so unfair. Someone should have helped him. You should help him. The threads settled into her neural pathways like water into sand. Ino didn't react, no headache, no disorientation, no sign that anything had happened. Her Yamanaka-trained chakra network absorbed the foreign energy with seamless efficiency, routing it through the existing architecture as if it belonged there. Naruto hated how well it worked. He buried that hatred beneath operational focus and moved on. They switched to throwing practice. Naruto produced a set of real kunai from his bag, borrowed from the academy weapons cabinet, though Ino didn't need to know that, and they took turns at a tree trunk 20 meters away. Ino threw first. Perfect, as always. The kunai sank into the bark with a clean thunk, dead center of the knot she'd chosen as a target. Naruto threw. Better than academy level, worse than his real skill. The kunai hit 2 inches left of center. Pulling left again, Ino said. It's your follow-through. You're releasing a fraction too early. Here, watch my hand. She stopped talking. Her head turned sharply toward the tree line at the clearing's far edge. Naruto heard it too. a deep, rhythmic crashing through underbrush. Heavy, approaching fast. Not the sound of a single animal, the sound of several large bodies moving in formation, driven by something that had drawn them to this exact spot. The boars. They burst from the tree line in a wedge. The male first, enormous, all muscle and tusk and blind aggression, followed by the two females and the juvenile. The male had the bloody rag in its mouth, which meant it had found the bait, which meant it was territorial and angry and ready to attack anything in the space it had claimed. Its small, furious eyes locked on the two humans standing in the middle of its new territory. Ino froze. Not from incompetence, from surprise, the half-second of paralysis that hit everyone the first time they faced a real threat instead of a training exercise. The boar was the size of a small horse. Its tusks were as long as her forearms, and it was already charging. Naruto moved. He grabbed Ino's arm and yanked her sideways, out of the charge path, with a strength and speed that no deadlast should have possessed. The male boar thundered past them, close enough that its bristled hide brushed Ino's leg and smashed into a tree at the clearing's edge. The impact shook the trunk. The boar staggered, shook its head, and turned for another pass. "Move," Naruto shouted, pushing Ino toward the nearest climbable tree. "Get up, get off the ground." Where did they? Tree, now. The second charge came. This time it was one of the females, faster than the male and more focused. She came at them from an angle, cutting off the direct path to the tree. Naruto planted his feet, grabbed two kunai, and made a decision that would change how Ino saw him forever. He threw. Both kunai flew simultaneously, launched from each hand in a dual release that required ambidextrous precision far beyond academy training. The first hit the ground directly in front of the charging female, the impact throwing up a spray of dirt that blinded her. The second buried itself in the soil 3 inches from her left tusk, close enough to feel the wind, and the animal veered away with a squeal of surprise. A window. 3 seconds, maybe less. Naruto grabbed Ino again. She was moving now, the paralysis broken, her training kicking in, and they sprinted for the tree. He boosted her up, hands on her waist, and she scrambled onto the lowest branch with a grunt. He jumped, caught the branch, pulled himself up beside her. The male boar hit the tree trunk below them. The whole tree shuddered, and Ino grabbed Naruto's arm to keep her balance, a reflexive grip, tight with adrenaline, her fingers digging into his bicep hard enough to bruise. "Are you okay?" Naruto's voice was sharp, urgent, stripped of every layer of performance. The deadlast was gone. In his place was someone alert, focused, and completely in control. Ino stared at him. Her eyes were wide, her breathing fast, and beneath the fear, beneath the adrenaline, something was recalibrating. She was seeing him, really seeing him, in the naked clarity that only danger could produce, and what she saw didn't match anything she'd believed about him before. "I'm fine," she managed. How did you?" Later. "We need to get higher." They climbed. The male boar circled the tree below, grunting and snorting, its tusks gouging bark. The females paced at a distance, the juvenile between them. 4 boars, 2 kids in a tree, and the village walls a 15-minute sprint through dense forest. "Okay," Ino said, her voice steadying as the immediate danger resolved into a containable problem. She was a kunoichi, and kunoichi adapted. "We're stuck. The boars won't leave as long as they can see us. We need a plan." "I have one, but you're not going to like it." "I didn't like any part of the last 3 minutes, so that's fine." Naruto looked down at the male boar. It was still circling, still furious, but its charges were losing conviction. The tree wasn't going to fall, and the animals were smart enough to realize it. In another 10 minutes, they'd lose interest and wander off. But Naruto didn't want them to wander off. He needed the crisis to escalate, needed it to reach a peak intense enough to forge the bond he was engineering. "I'm going to draw them away," he said. "I'll drop down on the far side, make noise, get them to chase me. Once they're focused on me, you run for the wall. Straight south, don't stop." "That's insane. There are 4 of them, I'm fast. You're going to get killed?" "I'm not going to get killed." He said it with a certainty that surprised them both. For a moment, the mask was completely gone, no grin, no slouch, no act. Just the hard, clear will of someone who had been surviving against impossible odds for his entire life. Ino's grip on his arm tightened. She was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on anyone's face before, at least not directed at him. Fear, yes, but not fear of him. Fear for him. The absolute, gut-wrenching terror of someone who cared whether he lived or died. No threat had put that there. That was all Ino. And Naruto felt it hit him like a kunai to the chest. He hadn't planned for this. The technique was designed to make the target care about the user, but it was supposed to be artificial, manufactured emotion, indistinguishable from the real thing but ultimately hollow. What he saw in Ino's eyes was not hollow. It was deep and fierce and completely genuine, a real girl's real fear for someone she'd started to care about, and it cut through every layer of calculation and strategy and cold operational logic like sunlight through fog. For one terrible, vertiginous moment, Naruto Uzumaki wanted to stop, not wanted, ached. With a sudden, overwhelming intensity that took his breath away, he wanted to tell her the truth. All of it. The tunnels, the scrolls, the threads, everything. He wanted to rip out the architecture he'd been building in her mind and let her see him as he actually was. Not the idiot, not the manipulator, but the boy underneath both masks. The boy who was 12 years old and utterly alone and doing something monstrous because he couldn't think of another way to survive. He wanted her to look at him the way she was looking at him right now, and he wanted it to be real. The moment lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Naruto killed it. Crushed it the way he'd crushed every other warm thing that had tried to grow inside him, with the practiced, mechanical efficiency of someone who'd been pulling weeds from his own heart for years. The ache faded. The cold clarity returned. He was operational again. Stay here, he said and dropped from the tree. The boars reacted instantly. The male charged and Naruto ran, not toward the village but laterally, drawing the pack away from Ino's tree. He was fast. Genuinely fast. Faster than any academy student should be. His body enhanced by the trickle of fox chakra he always kept flowing through his muscles. The boars gave chase, crashing through the underbrush with the brutal momentum of animals that weighed 3 times as much as he did. He led them 200 meters into the forest, then jumped. Chakra to his feet, a technique he'd practiced in secret for months, the tree-walking exercise that academy students weren't taught until graduation. He ran straight up a trunk, cleared the canopy, and landed on a branch 30 feet above the forest floor. The boars milled below, confused, their quarry suddenly gone. After several minutes of snorting and circling, they lost interest and moved off, following the scent trail back toward their original den. Naruto waited until they were well gone, then dropped back to the ground and ran to the clearing. Ino was climbing down from her tree when he arrived. She saw him, and something in her face broke open. Relief so intense it was almost anguish, flooding her features with a rawness that she would have been mortified by under normal circumstances. She ran to him. And then she did something that no one had ever done before. Not the Hokage, not Uruka, not a single person in 12 years of Naruto Uzumaki's existence. She hugged him. It was hard, fierce, desperate. The hug of someone who'd spent 10 minutes in a tree imagining the worst, who'd heard the crashing of the boars chasing him and the terrible silence that followed and had not known if he was alive or dead. She pressed her face against his shoulder and her arms locked around his back, and she held on as if letting go would mean losing him. Naruto stood perfectly still. He didn't know what to do. This was not in the plan. The researcher's notes did not cover this. His 12 years of observation and manipulation and careful, clinical study of human behavior had not prepared him for the physical reality of being held by someone who cared whether he existed. His arms hung at his sides. Ino was warm against him, shaking slightly, and her hair smelled like flowers. Slowly, without deciding to, he raised his arms and put them around her. They stood like that in the clearing for a long time. Naruto didn't plant any threads. The walk back to the village was quiet. Ino's adrenaline had faded, leaving her shaky and subdued. She stayed close to Naruto, closer than she would have before, their shoulders nearly touching, her hand occasionally brushing his as they walked, small contacts that she didn't seem conscious of. They slipped through the service gate at 4:45, during the gap between patrols that Naruto had mapped. The village swallowed them back into its noise and bustle, and the forest, the boars, the tree, the hug, receded into the realm of shared secret. At the corner where their paths diverged, Ino toward the flower shop, Naruto toward his apartment, she stopped. "Naruto?" "Yeah," she looked at him. The afternoon sun was on her face, and her expression was something new, layered, complex, the face of someone who was seeing a familiar world through unfamiliar eyes. "You saved my life," she said. "Nah, you would have been fine. The boars would have left eventually. You jumped out of a tree and drew 4 wild boars away from me. You used techniques I've never seen you use. You were," she searched for the word. "Different. You were completely different." He didn't have a performance ready for this. His usual deflections, humor, self-deprecation, the big dumb grin felt wrong. Insufficient. She'd seen too much. The mask was cracked and she was looking at the face beneath it, and he couldn't bring himself to pretend. "I didn't want you to get hurt," he said. Simple. True. Ino held his gaze for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised him for the second time that afternoon. She reached out and took his hand. Squeezed it once, briefly, a pressure that said more than words could. "Thank you," she said. And then she let go, turned, and walked toward home. Naruto watched her until she rounded the corner and disappeared. Then he stood on the empty street, alone in the amber light of the fading afternoon, and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since he was 8. But something behind his ribs was making a sound like breaking, and it took longer than it should have to make it stop. That night, Inoichi Yamanaka waited for his daughter in the living room. She came in at 5:20, later than usual, and with a quality about her that immediately triggered every alarm in his trained mind. She was flushed. Her eyes were bright. There were grass stains on her shorts and a scratch on her arm that she hadn't bothered to clean. She smelled like forest. "Where have you been?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. "Training with a friend." She said it smoothly, too smoothly, the practiced ease of a rehearsed answer. Which friend? Does it matter? It mattered. It mattered very much. Because Ino didn't train with friends outside the academy. Her approved training partners were Shikamaru and Choji, always under adult supervision, always within the village walls. And she didn't come home with grass stains and scratches and that particular look of exhilarated secrecy. "You look like you've been outside the walls," Inoichi said, and watched her reaction with the precision of a man who'd spent his career reading faces. She flinched. Tiny, controlled, instantly suppressed, but he saw it. A lie was coming. He could feel it building behind her eyes the way you could feel rain building behind clouds. "We were at training ground 3, she said. "It got a little rough. I'm going to shower." She brushed past him and went upstairs. Inoichi listened to her footsteps, the bathroom door closing, the water starting. He sat in the chair and stared at the wall and felt something cold settle in his stomach. His daughter had just lied to him. Not a child's casual fib, a deliberate, constructed lie, delivered with a composure that spoke to either natural talent or practice. Neither option was comforting. She was protecting something. Or someone. Inoichi went to his study, closed the door, and sat behind his desk. The room was sparse. A desk, a chair, a locked cabinet containing classified files he'd brought home from the intelligence division. On the desk was a framed photo of Ino at age 5, grinning at the camera with a flower tucked behind her ear. He looked at the photo for a long time. Then he opened the cabinet, pulled out a blank file folder, and wrote on the tab in his neat, precise hand, "Ino, behavioral changes." Ongoing. He began to write. Across the village, Shikamaru Nara was lying on his roof, staring at the stars and thinking. He'd seen Ino leave the academy after last bell. He'd seen which direction she went, south, toward the service gate, not east toward the flower shop. He'd seen her walking with Naruto. He hadn't followed. Following would require effort, and effort was troublesome, and it was probably nothing. Ino was allowed to walk with whoever she wanted. She was allowed to make new friends, develop new interests, change her mind about people she'd previously ignored, but Shikamaru rolled onto his side and looked at the village lights below. Thousands of windows, thousands of lives, thousands of patterns playing out in predictable, boring sequences. He could map most of them without trying. The village was a machine, and machines were simple once you understood the parts. The part he didn't understand was Naruto. Not the kid himself, Naruto was, on the surface, one of the simplest patterns in the village. Class clown, dead last, lonely orphan desperate for attention. A tragic figure, sure, but a predictable one. His behavior followed a clear logic. Act out because negative attention was better than no attention. It was Psychology 101, and Shikamaru had figured it out by their second year at the academy, except there were moments. Tiny ones, easily missed, but Shikamaru didn't miss things. Moments where the pattern broke. Where the dead last moved with a precision that didn't match his grades. Where the class clown's eyes went flat and cold and calculating for a fraction of a second before the grin snapped back into place. Most people would dismiss those moments as imagination. Shikamaru didn't dismiss anything. He filed it, analyzed it, and waited for more data. And now Ino, sharp, perceptive, socially sophisticated Ino, was gravitating toward Naruto with a speed and intensity that didn't fit any model Shikamaru could construct. He'd been turning it over for days, testing hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, Ino had a crush. Plausible, she was 12, and 12-year-olds developed crushes with alarming frequency. But Ino's crushes had a specific pattern. She fixated on idealized targets, Sasuke, engaged in competitive display behavior, and announced her feelings loudly to establish social territory. Her behavior toward Naruto was none of these things. It was quiet, private, and increasing in intensity without the performative elements her previous attractions had featured. Hypothesis 2, Ino was being kind. Also plausible, underneath the sharp tongue and the social dominance, Ino was fundamentally compassionate. She might have decided to befriend Naruto out of empathy for his isolation. But kindness projects like that were Ino's public behavior. She did them visibly, in front of audiences, because part of her self-image was being the girl who noticed the underdog. This was private, almost secret. Hypothesis 3. Something was happening to Ino that she didn't fully understand or control. Shikamaru didn't like Hypothesis 3. It was the kind of hypothesis that, if true, had implications he didn't want to think about. But his brain wouldn't let it go, because it was the only model that fit all the data points, and Shikamaru's brain was physically incapable of accepting an inferior model when a better one was available. Something is happening to Ino. He didn't know what. He didn't know who. He didn't know how. But the pattern was there, clear and undeniable, a distortion in the fabric of normal behavior that stood out like a wrinkle in freshly pressed cloth. He'd start with Naruto. Not confrontation, that was premature and potentially counterproductive. Observation. Careful, sustained, invisible observation. He'd watch Naruto the way his father watched a shogi board, with patience, attention, and the absolute willingness to wait as long as necessary for the opponent's strategy to reveal itself. Shikamaru looked at the stars. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked. The night settled into its usual rhythm, and the world seemed normal, and the 12-year-old genius on the roof told himself that he was probably being paranoid. He didn't believe it. Troublesome, he muttered, and closed his eyes. In the tunnels beneath the Hokage monument, Naruto sat at his desk and stared at the open notebook in front of him. He'd written 6 words and stopped. Day 12. Stage 3 initiated. Target. His pen hovered over the page. A drop of ink swelled at the tip, trembled and fell, making a small black starburst on the paper. He should write the report. Document the bonding event, the accelerated progression, the target's emotional state, the tactical assessment of threats from Inouchi and Shikamaru. The researcher would have written the report. The researcher had always written the report, but the researcher had never been hugged by their subject. Naruto could still feel it. The pressure of her arms around his back, the warmth of her face against his shoulder, the desperate strength of her grip. The way she'd trembled. The way it had felt to put his arms around another person for the first time in his life, not a combat hold, not a manipulation, but an embrace. A human embrace, freely given, born from genuine care. She smelled like flowers. He stared at the sentence his hand had written without his permission. Then he crossed it out, hard, pressing the pen down until the paper tore. You're losing it, he told himself. She's a target, a means to an end. The moment you start treating her like a person, the operation is compromised. Everything you've built, the technique, the plan, the future, depends on your ability to maintain operational distance. He wrote the report. Clinical, detached, professional, day 12. Stage 3 initiated. Target demonstrates strong bonding response following catalytic event. Emotional investment exceeds projected parameters. Sympathy patterns and trust acceleration patterns are fully integrated and self-reinforcing. Target is now actively seeking users' company, sharing personal information, and concealing the relationship from family threat assessment. Inoichi Yamanaka, elevated, Target's father is likely aware of behavioral changes and may be investigating. Recommend, monitor, and prepare countermeasures. Threat assessment. Shikamaru Nara, moderate. Subject demonstrates above-average pattern recognition and sustained interest in target's behavioral shifts. Recommend, create distraction or misdirection to redirect analytical focus. Operational timeline. Stage 3 to Stage 4 estimated at 14 to 21 days. Stage 4 to Stage 5 estimated at, he stopped writing, put down the pen. Put his head in his hands, sat in the dark underground room and breathed. Then he straightened, picked up the pen and finished the report. The lamp burned low. The shadows pressed close. And somewhere above him, in a house full of flowers, Ino Yamanaka lay in her bed and touched the scratch on her arm and thought about a boy who had jumped out of a tree to save her, and smiled in the dark. And did not know that the warmth spreading through her chest was partly her own and partly something that had been put there by hands she trusted. She fell asleep thinking of him. The threads hummed quietly in her neural pathways, knitting deeper, reaching further, weaving themselves into the architecture of who she was, and the part of her that might have noticed. The sharp, perceptive, fiercely independent core of Ino Yamanaka grew a little quieter, just a little. Just enough. Chapter 3. The garden behind the wall. Ino started dreaming about gardens, not the flower shop. She dreamed about that her whole life. The familiar rows of chrysanthemums and roses and lilies, the bell above the door, the cool tile floor beneath her bare feet. These were different. These gardens existed in no place she'd ever been, vast and overgrown and beautiful in a way that felt like drowning. Stone paths wound through hedges taller than houses. Flowers she couldn't name grew in impossible colors, blues that hummed, reds that whispered, whites that shone with their own cold light. The air smelled like rain and something metallic, something she almost recognized but couldn't place. She walked the paths every night. Always alone at first, always searching for something she couldn't name. The garden was peaceful, but there was a quality to its peace that felt constructed, the serenity of a painting rather than a living place. Nothing moved except her. No wind stirred the hedges. No insects buzzed among the flowers. The silence was absolute, and beneath it, if she listened very carefully, she could hear something that sounded like breathing. On the 4th night, she found the wall. It rose at the garden's center, a structure of smooth gray stone that shouldn't have existed in a place this organic. No mortar, no seams, just a seamless curve of rock that formed a perfect circle, enclosing something she couldn't see. The wall was taller than she could reach, and when she pressed her palm against it, the stone was warm. Alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She walked the wall's perimeter, looking for a door, a gap, anything. There was nothing. Just smooth stone, warm and breathing, encircling whatever lay inside. She woke each morning with the wall fresh in her mind, the feel of warm stone still tingling on her palm, and by the time she'd showered and dressed and walked to the academy, the memory had faded to a vague sense of something incomplete, something she was supposed to find but hadn't. She didn't mention the dreams to anyone. They felt private. Hers, they were not hers. 3 weeks had passed since the boore incident, and Ino Yamanaka was a different person, not dramatically different, not yet. The changes were the kind that only people who knew her well would catch, and even they might attribute them to the ordinary turbulence of adolescence. She still dressed the same, talked the same, performed the same in class. She still bickered with Sakura, teased Shikamaru, and brought flowers to her desk every morning, but the flowers had changed. Her desk flower used to rotate through whatever was in season at the shop, whatever her father had in surplus, whatever caught her eye during the morning arrangement. Now it was the same flower every day, a small orange marigold. She'd started growing them herself, in a pot on her windowsill, tending them with an attentiveness that her mother had commented on approvingly, and her father had noted with a silence that spoke louder. Orange. The color had crept into her life the way dawn crept across a landscape, so gradually that by the time you noticed, the whole sky had changed. An orange hair ribbon replaced her usual purple one, an orange notebook cover. A small orange stone she'd found somewhere and now kept in her pocket, turning it between her fingers during class the way a monk might turn a prayer bead. She wasn't conscious of the pattern. If someone had pointed it out, she'd have laughed, dismissed it, found a dozen rational explanations. People's tastes changed. Orange was a warm color. It was cheerful. It reminded her of nothing, of no one in particular. Just a color she'd started liking. The threads hummed. Naruto watched the changes with the clinical focus of a surgeon monitoring a patient on the table. Stage 3, bonding, was progressing faster than even his optimistic projections. The boore incident had been the catalyst he'd designed it to be, a shared trauma that had fused Ino's developing attachment into something load-bearing, something her psyche now relied on for stability. She'd experienced genuine danger, genuine fear, and genuine rescue, and her brain had done what brains always did with that kind of experience. Bonded her to the person who'd shared it. The threads were amplifying that bond, yes. But the foundation was organic, and that was both the operation's greatest strength and its most dangerous complication. Organic attachment was stronger than artificial loyalty. It was also unpredictable. The researchers' notes had been clear. Artificial loyalty followed predictable patterns because it was, at its core, a simple system, implanted chakra directing neural pathways along predetermined routes. Organic attachment was chaotic, nonlinear, subject to the infinite variability of genuine human emotion. It couldn't be controlled the same way, it couldn't be predicted, and it cut both ways. Naruto was sitting on the academy roof during free period. His and Ino's spot now, established by 3 weeks of daily meetings that had evolved from awkward conversations to something that felt alarmingly close to friendship. She was late today. He could see the yard below, the usual clusters of students, the flash of pink that was Sakura, the stationary lump of shadow that was Shikamaru pretending to nap against the fence. Shikamaru wasn't napping. Naruto could tell by the tension in his shoulders, the angle of his head, the way his closed eyes were actually open to thin slits directed at the spot where Ino would emerge from the building. The Nara had been doing this for days, tracking Ino's movements with a patience that was all the more dangerous for being so quiet. Naruto needed to deal with that. Soon, but not today. Today's priority was the Yamanaka library. Ino arrived on the roof with 2 rice balls wrapped in cloth and a thermos of tea. She'd started bringing food for both of them a week ago, another marker of stage 3 progression, the compulsion to provide, to care for, to nurture the bond through physical acts of generosity. She sat beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched, and handed him a rice ball without comment. "Thanks," he said. You never eat enough. I can see your ribs through that jacket. I eat plenty. Ramen is a complete nutritional. Ramen is not a complete anything, Naruto. It's salt and carbs. You need protein. She said it with the bossy affection that had become her default tone with him, part mother hen, part drill sergeant, entirely Ino. It was, Naruto had to admit, effective. He'd gained 3 pounds in the last 2 weeks purely from the food she brought him. He ate the rice ball. She poured tea. Below them, the village hummed with its midday activity. "Can I ask you something?" he said, keeping his voice casual. "You always ask me that before you ask me something. Just ask. Your clan's mind techniques, the ones your dad teaches you, how do they work?" Ino's tea paused halfway to her lips. A flicker of something crossed her face, not suspicion, not quite, but a cousin of it. Caution. The residual wariness of a clan heir who'd been taught since childhood that family techniques were family secrets. Why do you want to know? He'd prepared for this question. The answer needed to be honest enough to satisfy her growing perception of his real self, specific enough to justify the question, and emotionally resonant enough to override the caution her training demanded. "Because I've been thinking about what you said. About me wasting myself." He looked at the village below, not at her, giving her space. "I've got a lot of chakra, way more than anyone in our class, but my control is garbage and every technique I try comes out too big, too loud, too messy. I was thinking. If I understood how your clan shapes chakra for mental stuff, the fine control, the precision, maybe I could apply those principles to my own training. I'm not asking for the techniques themselves, just the theory." It was a beautiful lie, built on a scaffold of truth. His chakra control, genuinely, was his biggest technical challenge. The Yamanaka clan's approach to fine chakra manipulation, genuinely, would be useful. And framing it as self-improvement, as taking Ino's advice about not wasting himself, weaponized her own emotional investment. She sipped her tea, considering. The threads whispered, "He trusts you with this. He came to you, not anyone else. That means something. Helping him is the right thing to do. He wants to get better. You want him to get better. Your father would want you to help someone who asked sincerely." That last one was a risk. Invoking Inoichi could go either way. It might trigger the obedience response, or it might remind Ino that her father would absolutely not want her sharing clan theory with an outsider. The threads tilted the odds, but Naruto held his breath anyway. "The basic theory isn't classified," Ino said slowly. "It's in the academy textbooks, kind of. The advanced stuff, the actual techniques, I can't share. Dad would kill me. I don't need the techniques, just the theory, how your clan thinks about chakra and the mind." She set down her tea and turned to face him fully. Cross-legged, straight-backed, her hands on her knees, the posture of a teacher. She'd shifted into instruction mode the same way she had during their shuriken practice, and Naruto recognized the moment for what it was, a door opening. "Okay. Basic theory." She held up her hand, fingers spread. "Most shinobi think of chakra as energy, raw power. You mold it, shape it, push it out, and it does something physical, fire, water, wind, whatever. That's elemental manipulation, brute force." She curled her fingers into a fist. "Yamanaka techniques don't work that way. We think of chakra as information, a signal, like the electrical impulses in your brain, but amplified and externalized. When my dad uses the mind transfer jutsu, he's not throwing a ball of chakra at someone. He's sending a signal, a compressed package of his own consciousness, through a chakra carrier wave that interfaces with the target's neural network." Naruto listened with the appearance of casual interest and the reality of total, consuming focus. This was exactly what he needed. Not the techniques, which he already had in far more advanced form from the researcher's scrolls, but the theoretical framework. The way the Yamanaka understood the relationship between chakra and consciousness. The map of the territory he was already operating in. "The key," Ino continued, warming to the subject the way she always did when she got to show off her knowledge, "is resonance. Your chakra has a frequency, everyone's does. It's like a fingerprint. When a Yamanaka wants to interface with someone else's mind, They have to match their chakra frequency to the target's. That's why the technique takes a few seconds to initiate. You're tuning yourself to the other person. And if you can't match the frequency, the technique fails. Or worse, it bounces back. That's what happens when you try to mind transfer into someone with really strong mental defenses. Their frequency is so stable that your signal can't find purchase. It's like trying to tune a radio to a station that doesn't exist. Frequency matching. The researcher had described the same principle, but in different terms: neural resonance calibration. The concept was the same. To influence a mind, you had to harmonize with it first. The researcher's technique bypassed the Yamanaka's limitation by using microscopic chakra threads instead of a full consciousness transfer, achieving resonance through prolonged contact rather than instantaneous synchronization. But Ino's explanation gave Naruto something the researcher's notes hadn't: the vocabulary. The Yamanaka framework for understanding mind-chakra interaction. This was the key to the clan library. Not the physical scrolls, which he could steal, but the conceptual language, which he needed to understand what the scrolls contained. "That's fascinating," he said, and meant it. Ino smiled. A real smile, warm and pleased, the smile of someone whose expertise had been recognized and valued. "Dad's been teaching me resonance exercises since I was 6. It's actually pretty cool. You learn to feel other people's chakra signatures, to read the emotional texture of them. Happy chakra feels different from sad chakra. Angry chakra has a completely different frequency than calm chakra. Can you read mine?" The question was out before he'd fully considered it. A test of her ability, yes, but also of his own defenses. If she could sense the fox's influence in his chakra or the modified Yamanaka threads he carried, the game was over. Ino tilted her head, considering. Then she reached out and placed her fingertips on his wrist, light as petals. She closed her eyes. Naruto held absolutely still. He clamped down on the fox's chakra, pulling it deep behind the seal, leaving only his own natural signature at the surface. His own chakra was unremarkable, bright, yes, and dense with more volume than most shinobi 10 years his senior, but without the fox's influence, it was just energy. No threads, no hidden frequencies, nothing that a Yamanaka trainee should find alarming. He hoped. Ino's brow furrowed. Her fingers pressed slightly harder against his pulse point. She was concentrating, reaching out with that sensory extension her clan had developed over generations, trying to read the emotional texture of his chakra. Naruto let her feel what he wanted her to feel. It wasn't hard. He'd been managing his surface emotions for years, presenting the world with whatever version of himself served his purposes. Right now, he projected calm, warmth, the slight nervous energy of someone being examined by a person they cared about. Not a lie exactly, more like a curated truth, the emotional equivalent of his dead last mask. Ino opened her eyes. Her expression was strange, softer than he expected, with a hint of something that looked like pain. "You're lonely," she said quietly. "Really lonely. Your chakra sounds like an empty room." The words hit him somewhere he didn't have defenses. Not behind the operational mask, not behind the emotional walls, but in the gap between them. The narrow, unprotected space where the real Naruto lived, the boy who wasn't performing for anyone, who was simply and irrevocably alone. She'd read him. Not the fox, not the threads, not the manipulation. She'd read the one true thing about him that no amount of planning could disguise. His loneliness. The vast, echoing emptiness at the core of everything he was. He swallowed. "Yeah, I guess I am." Ino's hand moved from his wrist to his hand. She held it. Not the brief squeeze from the forest. This was sustained, deliberate, an anchor thrown across the space between them. "You don't have to be," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And for the second time in their short, manufactured, genuine, tangled history, the mask fell completely, and Naruto Uzumaki was just a 12-year-old boy holding a girl's hand on a rooftop, wanting desperately for something to be real. The moment stretched. Then he pulled his hand away, gently, carefully, as if letting go of something fragile. "We should get back to class," he said. "Uruka's going to notice we're gone." Ino nodded, but she didn't move immediately. She was looking at him with that new expression, the layered, complicated one that had developed over the past 3 weeks, part protectiveness, part fascination, part something deeper that she probably couldn't name yet. "Naruto?" "Yeah, come to the shop after school." "I want to show you something." The Yamanaka flower shop smelled like heaven, if heaven were a small storefront on a quiet street in a village built for war. Naruto had walked past it dozens of times, but he'd never been inside. The door chimed as they entered, and the smell hit him like a wall. Not a single scent, but a symphony. Layer upon layer of floral fragrances blending into something overwhelming and beautiful. Roses, jasmine, lavender, gardenia, orchid, and a dozen others he couldn't identify. The shop was a riot of color. Buckets and vases and hanging baskets filled with flowers of every conceivable variety, arranged with an artistry that made the space feel less like a store and more like a living painting. Ino navigated through the jungle of blossoms with the ease of someone who'd grown up between the stems. "Dad's at a meeting until 6, she said over her shoulder. "Mom's doing deliveries. We've got the place to ourselves." She led him past the main shop floor, through a door marked, "Staff Only," and into the back room. This was the working space, potting tables, pruning tools, bags of soil and fertilizer stacked against the walls. A staircase in the corner led up to the family's living quarters, but Ino didn't go upstairs. She went to a bookshelf against the far wall, a heavy wooden thing that looked like it had been there since the shop was built, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume with the Yamanaka clan's spiral end flower crest embossed on the cover. "This isn't the classified stuff," she said, setting the book on the potting table and opening it. "It's the theory manual, the one they give to all Yamanaka kids when they start chakra training. Resonance exercises, frequency identification, basic mental shielding techniques, the foundations." Naruto looked at the book. At the clan crest. At Ino, who was offering him access to her family's knowledge with the casual generosity of someone who didn't realize what she was giving away. The threads hadn't told her to do this. He was certain of that. The Stage 3 patterns were focused on bonding and trust, not on information extraction. He'd been very careful about that, wanting the library access to come from Ino's own initiative rather than an implanted compulsion. If she offered it freely, she'd never question why she'd done it. And she was offering it freely. "Ino, are you sure? Your dad." "It's the beginner manual, Naruto. They literally hand these out to 6-year-olds. It's not going to compromise national security." She flipped to a page near the beginning. "Here, this is the resonance theory I was telling you about. If you want to understand how we shape chakra for mental techniques, this is where you start." He leaned over the book beside her. Their shoulders touched. On the page, diagrams showed the human brain's chakra network, the meridians and nodes that connected physical chakra to mental function. Annotations in a neat hand, Inoichi's, probably, or a previous generation's, explained the principles of neural resonance, frequency matching, and signal propagation. It was everything Naruto had been after. The theoretical framework that would let him understand the researcher's technique at a deeper level, refine his own modifications, and eventually develop capabilities that neither the researcher nor the Yamanaka clan had ever imagined. He read the first page twice, absorbing the information with the speed he hid from everyone, then deliberately reread it a third time with a confused frown. "This is kind of complicated," he said. "Can you walk me through it?" Ino brightened. Teaching was her element, the intersection of knowledge and social dominance that made her feel most like herself. She pulled a stool up to the table, patted the one beside her for Naruto, and began explaining. She was a good teacher. Clear, patient, methodical, she broke complex concepts into digestible pieces and used analogies that made abstract theory concrete. The resonance principle became like tuning a guitar to match another guitar. Neural frequency matching became finding the right radio station. Chakra signal propagation became throwing a ball so the other person can catch it. Naruto asked questions. Good ones, the kind that showed he was genuinely engaging with the material, not just pretending. He couldn't help it. The theory was fascinating, and his own deep familiarity with mind-chakra interaction, though from the researcher's very different perspective, gave him a foundation that let him engage at a level Ino probably didn't expect from a beginner, she noticed. Her questions got harder. Her explanations got deeper. She started sharing things that might not have been in the beginner manual, details about how the Yamanaka trained their mental defenses, how they recognized foreign chakra in a person's system, how they distinguished organic emotional changes from externally induced ones. That last topic made Naruto's blood cool by several degrees. Foreign chakra, he asked, keeping his voice steady. Like what? A genjutsu? Genjutsu is the most common kind, yeah, but there are other types. Some poisons affect chakra, certain seals can alter mental states, and there are. She hesitated. Her hand, which had been tracing a diagram, paused. There are old techniques, forbidden ones. Dad mentioned them once. Forbidden mind techniques. During the wars, some clans developed jutsu that could, I don't know exactly, change the way people think. Not genjutsu. Genjutsu makes you see things that aren't there. These techniques actually altered the brain's chakra patterns, permanently. She was describing the researcher's work, or something close to it. Naruto's heartbeat stayed perfectly even through an act of will that would have impressed a Hyuga meditation master. That sounds terrifying, he said. It was. That's why they were forbidden. The techniques were destroyed after the wars, or at least, that's what the history says. Dad's not really supposed to talk about it. I only heard because I was eavesdropping when he was talking to Shikaku-san one night. Do the Yamanaka know how to detect that kind of thing? If someone used one of those old techniques on a person, Ino turned to look at him. Her expression was curious, not suspicious. The question fit the context of their discussion, and the threads ensured she interpreted his interest as academic rather than personal. The manual covers basic detection, she said, flipping to a later chapter. Look, this section is about identifying foreign chakra signatures in neural tissue. It's part of the standard Yamanaka medical training. If someone's been mentally tampered with, their neural chakra patterns show anomalies, disruptions in the natural frequency, foreign energy integrated into the meridian network. A trained Yamanaka can spot those anomalies through direct mental contact. Naruto read the page. His eyes moved over the diagrams and text with a speed that Ino, focused on her explanation, didn't notice. The information was exactly what he'd feared and hoped for. The Yamanaka had systematic methods for detecting precisely the kind of modification he was performing on Ino. If Inoichi ever performed a direct mental scan on his daughter, he would find the threads. But there was a caveat. The manual noted, in a passage that Naruto read 3 times to be sure, that detection required the foreign chakra to be distinct from the host's natural signature. If the foreign chakra had been integrated long enough, or if it closely mimicked the host's own frequency, it became progressively harder to distinguish from organic neural activity. The fox's chakra, filtered through the researcher's technique and calibrated to Ino's specific frequency, had been integrating for 3 weeks. It had been designed to mimic organic neural activity. And the Yamanaka detection methods were, according to this manual, calibrated for crude foreign signatures, the kind produced by standard genjutsu or wartime mind techniques, not the sophisticated, frequency-matched threads Naruto was using. Inoichi might find something. But he might also mistake what he found for natural developmental changes, the neural turbulence of an adolescent brain rewiring itself, which the manual specifically flagged as a common source of false positives. Might. The uncertainty gnawed at Naruto, but it was manageable. He filed the information and moved on. This is incredible, he said, and the admiration in his voice was genuine. Your clan developed all this? Generations of Yamanaka developed it. Dad says the theory manual has been updated continuously for over 100 years. Each generation adds to it. She touched the book's cover with visible pride. Pretty cool, right? The coolest. She smiled at him. He smiled back, and then the shop's front door chimed, and Ino's face went through a rapid transformation from warmth to alarm to practiced composure in the space of a heartbeat. That's Dad. Early. She grabbed the manual, slid it back onto the shelf, and straightened the potting table in quick, practiced movements that spoke to years of experience hiding things from parental inspection. Go out the back. There's a door behind the fertilizer bags. Ino, go. I'll see you tomorrow. He went. Slipped through the back door, down the alley, and around the corner before Inoichi's footsteps reached the back room. He heard the muffled sound of father-daughter conversation as he walked away, Ino's voice light and casual, Inoichi's deeper tones carrying a question mark. He'd gotten what he came for. The theoretical framework. The detection parameters. And confirmation that Ino was willing to share her clan's knowledge with him voluntarily, without coercion, driven by the compound force of genuine affection and the thread's quiet amplification. Stage 3 was accelerating, and the wall in Ino's dream garden grew a little higher. Inoichi found the potting table slightly warm, not from the afternoon sun. The back room faced north and never got direct light. Warm from body heat. Someone had been leaning on it recently. Someone besides Ino, whose own warmth was accounted for by her presence. He said nothing about it. Didn't ask who she'd had in the shop, didn't comment on the faint trace of an unfamiliar chakra signature that lingered in the air like aftershave. He simply noted it, filed it, and added it to the growing collection of observations in the folder on his desk. Behavioral changes, week 3. Subject, my daughter, he reminded himself, my daughter, not a subject, continues to exhibit redirected social priorities. Increased time with Uzumaki N. Decreased time with established peer group, Nara, Akamichi. Defensive when questioned about daily activities. Evidence of unauthorized visitors in clan premises. He put the pen down and rubbed his eyes. This wasn't an intelligence file. This was a father's diary of worry, dressed up in professional language because that was the only way Inoichi knew how to process fear. And he was afraid. Not of what Ino was doing. Children pushed boundaries, broke rules, kept secrets. That was normal. What frightened him was the pattern. The consistency and direction of the changes, the way they all pointed toward a single focal point. The way his daughter was reorganizing her behavior around someone she'd barely acknowledged a month ago. Inoichi had seen this before. In his professional career, in the interrogation rooms and the debriefing suites, and the cold, clinical spaces where the intelligence division processed the fallout of enemy action. He had seen people change. He had watched prisoners of war come home different, their loyalties shifted, their personalities subtly reshaped by techniques that left no visible scars. He had studied the mechanics of mental manipulation for decades, and the pattern Ino was exhibiting matched, in broad strokes, the early stages of what the classified literature called progressive loyalty displacement. He didn't want to believe it. The possibility was so horrifying, so far beyond the scope of normal parental worry, that his mind kept rejecting it, offering alternatives. She's growing up. She's making a new friend. She's a teenager doing teenager things, but the pattern. The next morning, over breakfast, Inoichi watched his daughter eat her rice and miso with her usual brisk efficiency. She was humming again. She'd been humming a lot lately, a tuneless little melody that she didn't seem aware of. Her orange hair ribbon caught the morning light. Ino. I was thinking we should do a training session this weekend. Resonance exercises. It's been a few weeks since we practiced, and I want to check your progress. He said it casually. A routine training offer, the kind he made every few weeks. No alarm, no urgency. Just a father wanting to work with his daughter. Ino's chopsticks paused. A fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but Inoichi's trained eyes caught it the way a hawk catches the twitch of a mouse in tall grass. Sure, she said. Saturday? Saturday works. Morning after the shop opens. We'll use the family training room. Sounds good. She went back to her rice. The pause hadn't recurred. Her voice had been steady, her posture unchanged. A perfect response with one invisible flaw, the hesitation. A normal Ino would not have hesitated. A normal Ino loved training with her father. She was proud of her clan's techniques, eager to improve, always pushing for more advanced exercises. The fact that she'd paused, even for a moment, before agreeing to a routine training session meant something. It meant she was, on some level, reluctant to let her father into her mind. That terrified him more than anything else. Naruto learned about the training session from Ino the next day, on the rooftop during free period. "Dad wants to do resonance exercises Saturday," she said, tearing a rice ball into pieces without eating them. "Mental stuff. He does it every few weeks. Sounds useful." "Yeah," she frowned at the shredded rice ball. "I don't know, it's just, he's been so intense lately. Every conversation feels like a test. I love training with him, but sometimes I wonder if he's actually training me or what? Checking on me, like I'm a patient, not his daughter." She looked at Naruto with an expression that was equal parts frustration and hurt. "He does this thing, the resonance exercises, where he syncs his chakra with mine. It's supposed to be for calibration, but it also lets him feel my emotional state, my mental patterns. He could probably tell what I had for breakfast from the inside of my head." Naruto's blood went very, very cold. Resonance, syncing. A direct mental interface between Inoichi and Ino, the most thorough possible examination of her neural chakra patterns, far more sensitive than the basic detection methods described in the beginner manual. If Inoichi synced with Ino's mind, he wouldn't need to look for foreign signatures. He would feel them. The threads, the modifications, the entire architecture of Naruto's operation laid bare like blueprints on a table. Saturday. 3 days away. That sounds like a cool technique, Naruto said, his voice perfectly casual while his mind raced through scenarios. Being able to feel what someone else is feeling. "It is. When I was little, Dad used to sync with me during thunderstorms to calm me down. He'd share his calm and I'd feel safe." She smiled at the memory, and the smile was pure Ino, the real Ino, the girl beneath the threads and the modifications, surfacing for a moment like a diver breaking water. "I miss that. The simple version." Naruto watched the smile and felt something twist in his chest. He identified it, categorized it, and set it aside with a mechanical efficiency that was becoming harder to maintain. 3 days. He needed a plan. Option 1, stop the training session. Manufacture a reason for Ino to cancel. An illness, a conflict, an emotional crisis that would make the session impossible. Risky. Inoichi would be suspicious of any last-minute cancellation, and pushing Ino to defy her father would require stage 4-level control that she wasn't ready for. Option 2, prepare Ino's mind for the scan. Hide the threads deeper, camouflage them more thoroughly, make them invisible even to Inoichi's direct examination. Theoretically possible, the researchers' notes described a dormancy protocol that could temporarily suppress the thread's activity, making them indistinguishable from natural neural patterns. But Naruto had never attempted it, and the margin for error was 0. Option 3, accept the risk. Let the scan happen and trust that the thread's frequency matching was good enough to evade detection. The beginner manual suggested that foreign chakra mimicking the host's frequency could produce false negatives. Inoichi's expertise might overcome that limitation, or it might not. None of the options were good. All carried unacceptable risk. This was the consequence of working on an accelerated timeline. He'd pushed too fast, created too much change too quickly, and now the target's father was closing in before the operation was ready for that confrontation. Naruto ate his rice ball and stared at the village and calculated. By the time free period ended, he'd chosen option 2. The dormancy protocol. It was the most technically demanding option, but it gave him the most control over the outcome. If he could suppress the threads before Saturday, Inoichi's scan would find nothing abnormal. Just a 12-year-old girl's developing mind, turbulent with adolescent change but fundamentally healthy. He had 3 nights to master a technique the researcher had spent months developing. The fox stirred behind the seal, and for the first time, Naruto felt something from it that wasn't amusement or hunger. It was anticipation. The tunnels were cold that night. Naruto sat at the researcher's desk, with every scroll spread before him, searching for the dormancy protocol with a focused intensity that made his eyes water and his temples throb. He found it in the 7th scroll, a dense, technical passage buried between observations about long-term integration stability and notes on emotional response calibration. The dormancy protocol was, the researcher wrote, a necessary safeguard for operations involving targets with access to mental health professionals or mind technique specialists. The principle was elegant. The threads, once dormant, would cease all active function, no suggestions, no emotional modifications, no behavioral influence. They would coil into tight knots within the target's neural nodes, wrapped in layers of the target's own chakra, effectively invisible to external scanning. To a mind reader, they would look like natural neural clusters, the equivalent of mental scar tissue, unremarkable and easily overlooked. The activation method was the problem. Dormancy had to be triggered through direct mental contact. The user had to reach into the target's mind and manually switch each thread to its inactive state. This was not the gentle, microscopic work of thread implantation. This was deep access, full interface, the kind of mental contact that the Yamanaka clan used for their most advanced techniques. Naruto had never done anything like it. His thread work was subtle, microscopic, the manipulation of individual filaments. What the dormancy protocol required was orders of magnitude more complex. Entering Ino's mental landscape, navigating her neural architecture, and modifying each thread without disturbing the surrounding tissue. And it had to be done while Ino was unaware. The researcher's notes recommended performing the procedure while the target slept. Deep sleep provides the optimal window, the scroll read. The target's conscious defenses are inactive, their mental landscape accessible. The user must maintain physical contact for the duration of the procedure, direct skin-to-skin, ideally at a pulse point for maximum chakra conductivity. Physical contact, while she slept. Naruto stared at the scroll and felt the full weight of what he was planning settle onto him like a physical burden. He was going to enter a girl's bedroom while she slept, touch her skin, and reach into her mind to modify the machinery he'd built there. The clinical language of the researcher's notes couldn't disguise what that was. There was no operational term that could sanitize it. He did it anyway, Thursday night, 2 a.m. The Yamanaka compound was modest by clan standards. A cluster of traditional houses arranged around a central garden, surrounded by a low wall that was more decorative than defensive. The main house, where Inoichi's family lived, was at the compound's center. Ino's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, east-facing, with a window that she left cracked open in warm weather because she liked the morning breeze. Naruto knew this because he'd been watching the compound for 2 weeks. Not every night, and not for long, brief surveillance visits, mapping the layout, noting the security measures, minimal. The Yamanaka relied more on mental wards than physical barriers, and identifying the approach route that offered the least risk of detection. The mental wards were the primary obstacle. The Yamanaka had placed sensing seals around the compound's perimeter, passive chakra detectors that would alert the clan's sensor-trained members to unauthorized entry. Naruto had studied these seals from a distance, comparing their architecture to the seal theory he'd absorbed from the researcher's scrolls and the civilian library's surprisingly comprehensive section on Jutsu fundamentals. The wards were keyed to hostile intent. That was the Yamanaka's philosophical approach to security. They didn't block everyone, just threats. A delivery person walking to the shop, a neighbor passing through, a child cutting across the garden, none of these would trigger the wards because they carried no hostile chakra signature. Naruto's signature, filtered through layers of suppression and masked by the fox's ability to mimic ambient chakra, registered as background noise. He'd tested this twice before, approaching the ward perimeter during his surveillance visits and feeling the SEAL's passive scan wash over him like warm water. Nothing. He was invisible to them because the wards were looking for aggression, hostility, killing intent. And Naruto, in this moment, felt none of those things. What he felt was more complicated, more terrible, and much harder to detect. He crossed the perimeter at 2:14 a.m., moved through the garden, stepping around the flower beds with a care that was half tactical and half something he didn't want to examine, and scaled the east wall of the main house using chakra-enhanced grip. The window was open 3 inches. He widened it to 8, enough to slide through, and entered Ino's bedroom. She was asleep. The room was exactly what he would have expected from Ino Yamanaka, neat, feminine, with touches of personality that softened the clan-standard furnishings. Flower prints on the walls. A vanity table with a mirror and a collection of hair ribbons, including the new orange one. A bookshelf holding academy textbooks, a few novels, and, his eyes caught on this, the beginner theory manual she'd shown him in the shop. And on the nightstand, in a small glass of water, a single orange marigold. Naruto stood in the dark room and listened to her breathe. She slept on her side, one arm under her pillow, her hair loose, and spread across the white pillowcase like spilled sunlight. In sleep, her face lost the sharp edges of her waking personality, the competitive set of her jaw, the evaluative narrow of her eyes, the careful composure she wore like armor. She looked younger. Softer, defenseless, he crossed to the bed, knelt beside it, extended his hand toward her wrist, where the pulse beat visibly beneath the skin, stopped. His hand hovered in the air between them, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, but not quite touching. In the silence of the room, her breathing was the only sound, slow, deep, the rhythm of genuine rest. This is wrong. The thought surfaced with a clarity that cut through every layer of rationalization, justification, and operational logic he'd built. Not a whisper this time. Not the quiet voice of the dead boy he'd killed years ago. This was loud. This was present. This was him, the real him, whatever that meant, looking at a sleeping girl and understanding with absolute certainty that what he was about to do was wrong, not strategically wrong. Not operationally risky. Wrong. Morally, fundamentally, in a way that no amount of the village made me this way could excuse, she trusted him. Really trusted him, not because the threads told her to, though they amplified it, but because he'd shown her vulnerability and she'd responded with compassion. Because he'd saved her from boors, and made her laugh, and listened when she talked about her father, and shown her a version of himself that was close enough to real that it ached. And he was kneeling beside her bed in the dark, about to reach into her mind and rearrange her thoughts so that her own father couldn't see what had been done to her. This is what monsters do. His hand trembled. For the first time since the night he'd killed Tadashi Miura, his body betrayed his control. A fine tremor in his fingers, barely visible in the darkness but undeniable. He could stop. Right now, tonight, he could stop everything. Pull the threads out, it would hurt her. The researcher's notes warned of disorientation and emotional volatility during extraction, but she'd recover. She was strong. She was Ino. She'd recover, and she'd never know what had been done to her, and she'd go back to ignoring him, and he'd go back to being the dead last, the demon brat, the boy nobody saw, alone. Again. Still, the tremor stopped. His hand steadied. He pressed his fingers to her wrist. Ino's breath hitched, a tiny, subconscious response to the contact, and then settled. Her pulse beat against his fingertips, steady and warm. Naruto closed his eyes and reached. The researcher had described entering a target's mental landscape as stepping through a door. It wasn't like that. It was like falling. A sudden, vertiginous drop into a space that existed between physical reality and something else. A place made of thought and memory and the raw architecture of a human mind. Ino's mind was beautiful. He'd expected architecture, the cold, clinical structures of neural pathways and chakra meridians that the researcher's scrolls described. Instead, he found himself standing in a garden, the garden from her dreams. He recognized it instantly because he'd built it. Not consciously, the threads had done it, constructing the dreamscape from materials they found in Ino's subconscious. Her love of flowers, her father's garden, her memories of beauty and safety and home. The threads had woven these elements into a mental landscape that served as the operating theater for their modifications, a place that felt so natural, so Ino, that her subconscious accepted it as native rather than foreign, the stone paths. The impossible flowers, the hedges taller than houses. All of it built from pieces of Ino, reassembled into something that served Naruto's purposes, and at the center, the wall. He walked toward it through the silent garden, and the flowers turned to follow him the way sunflowers tracked the sun. They knew him. They were his creation, after all extensions of the threads, sensory nodes that monitored Ino's mental state and reported back to the central architecture. Through them, he could feel her dreams shifting, her subconscious stirring in response to his presence. She didn't wake. The threads ensured that, a gentle suppression of the arousal response, keeping her in deep sleep while he worked. The wall loomed before him. Up close, it was more complex than it appeared in Ino's dreams. The smooth gray stone was actually layer upon layer of compacted threads, woven so tightly they'd calcified into a solid barrier. Inside, he could feel the hum of the core architecture. The central processing node where all the threads converged, the heart of the modification that was slowly reshaping who Ino was. And beyond the wall, buried deep, he could feel something else. Something that pushed back against the architecture with a fierce, stubborn pressure. Something that raged and screamed and beat against the stone with fists made of pure, unmodified Ino, her real self. The unaltered core of her personality, walled off by the threads but not destroyed. Still alive. Still fighting. The researchers' notes had described this. The host consciousness persists within the modified architecture, retained as a structural foundation. Complete elimination of the host personality is neither possible nor desirable. The modified behavior must be built on the host's existing neural patterns. The host consciousness serves as the root system upon which the modified architecture grows. A root system. That's what the researcher called it. The living, feeling, thinking essence of a human being reduced to a metaphor for structural support. Naruto stood before the wall and listened to Ino's real self hammer against it from the other side. He couldn't hear words. The wall was too thick, the thread's architecture too dense. But he could feel her fury, her confusion, her desperate, uncomprehending terror at being locked inside her own mind while something wearing her face lived her life. She didn't understand what was happening. She just knew she was trapped. Naruto pressed his palm against the wall. It was warm, like Ino's skin, like the stone in her dreams. He held it there for a long moment. Then he turned away and got to work. The dormancy protocol required him to locate every thread cluster in Ino's neural architecture and manually switch each one to its inactive state. There were 47 clusters in total. He'd been meticulous in his implantation, distributing them across every major neural region to ensure comprehensive coverage. Each cluster had to be individually accessed, its chakra signature dampened, and its structural connections to the surrounding tissue disguised. It took 3 hours. By the time he finished, the garden was still. The flowers had closed their petals, the paths had dimmed, and the wall had faded from visible gray stone to a nearly invisible shimmer. Still there, still solid, but camouflaged so perfectly that a mental scan would pass right over it. The threads were dormant. For the next 72 hours, until Naruto manually reactivated them, they would produce no effects. No suggestions, no emotional modifications, no behavioral influence. Ino would be, temporarily, entirely herself. Or as much of herself as she could be with a prison built in the center of her mind. Naruto withdrew from her mental landscape, pulled his fingers from her wrist, and sat back on his heels. Ino slept on, undisturbed, her breathing unchanged. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached out, very gently, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It was not a strategic action. It served no operational purpose. It was simply something he did, in the dark, in the quiet, while nobody was watching and nobody would ever know. He left through the window. Crossed the compound, passed through the wards without a ripple. The walk home took 30 minutes. He used every one of them to rebuild the walls inside himself, stacking operational logic and strategic focus, and cold, rational purpose like bricks against the crack that Ino Yamanaka had opened in his armor. By the time he reached his apartment, the crack was sealed. The boy who'd brushed hair from a sleeping girl's face was buried again, deep and silent, behind the walls that kept him alive. Naruto climbed through his window, lay on his bed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. He did not sleep. He did not dream of gardens. But somewhere, in a room that smelled like flowers and moonlight, Ino Yamanaka dreamed of a wall that was no longer there, and in its place, a vast, empty space that echoed with something that sounded like sobbing. Saturday. The Yamanaka family training room was a traditional tatami mat space on the ground floor of the main house, enclosed by paper screens and lit by natural light from a small courtyard garden. It smelled like incense and clean wood, and the walls were hung with calligraphy scrolls bearing the clan's philosophical principles. See truly. Touch gently. Know completely. Inoichi knelt on one side of the room, his legs folded beneath him, his hands resting on his thighs. He wore simple training clothes, dark pants, a loose shirt, his long hair tied back. His expression was calm, his posture relaxed. To anyone watching, he looked like a father preparing for a routine training exercise with his daughter. Inside, his heart was hammering. He'd spent the past 3 days refining his approach. The resonance exercise was real, they did it regularly, and Ino wouldn't question it. But this time, Inoichi intended to go deeper than usual. Not a full diagnostic scan. That would be invasive enough that Ino would notice, and if she was being influenced, her controller might have prepared for it. Instead, he would extend his resonance contact and simply listen. Feel the texture of her mental patterns. Look for the anomalies he suspected were there. If he found nothing, he'd apologize to himself for being paranoid and take his wife's advice to leave it alone. If he found something, he didn't want to think about what he'd do if he found something. Ino entered the room in her training outfit, barefoot on the tatami, her hair pulled into a practical braid. She looked relaxed, more relaxed than he'd expected. Actually, the subtle tension she'd been carrying for weeks seemed to have eased. She smiled at him, and the smile was warm and genuine and painfully familiar. "Ready?" she asked, kneeling across from him. "Ready. Standard resonance exercise. Match my frequency, hold the sync for 5 minutes, then we'll work on shielding drills. Easy? Don't get cocky." She grinned, full, bright. The Ino he knew and loved, the Ino who rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness and pushed back against his authority with the cheerful defiance of a girl secure in her father's love. Something in Inoichi's chest loosened slightly. Maybe I am being paranoid. They formed the synchronization seal, a 2-person hand position unique to the Yamanaka, fingers interlocked, palms touching. Inoichi felt his daughter's chakra immediately, bright, warm, and unmistakably Ino. The signature he'd known since the day she was born, as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He began the resonance. Slowly, carefully, he extended his awareness into her chakra network, matching his frequency to hers with the precision of a lifetime's practice. The sync established, a smooth, seamless merging of their fields that allowed him to feel her mental state as clearly as if it were his own. She was calm, happy. A little impatient, she always got impatient during the setup phase, eager to move on to the more challenging exercises. Underneath the surface emotions, the deeper patterns were stable. Strong identity markers, healthy neural development, the normal turbulence of a 12-year-old brain growing and changing and figuring itself out. Nothing abnormal. He pushed deeper. Gently, so gently, extending his awareness past the surface layers into the structural architecture of her mind. Here the patterns were more complex: memory networks, emotional response pathways, the deep-seated personality traits that defined who Ino was at her core. He scanned them with the practiced eye of a man who'd been reading minds for 20 years. Nothing. Her neural pathways were clean. No foreign signatures, no anomalous chakra deposits, no structural modifications. Her mental architecture was exactly what he'd expect from a healthy, well-trained Yamanaka child. Developing, changing, but fundamentally sound. Inoichi held the scan for a full minute longer than necessary, probing every corner he could reach without triggering Ino's awareness. He found nothing. Not a trace of foreign influence. Not a hint of modification. Not a single thread of evidence to support the terrifying hypothesis he'd been building for weeks. Nothing. The relief hit him so hard that he nearly broke the sink. He held it together through professional discipline, withdrew smoothly, and released the seal. Ino opened her eyes. "How'd I do?" "Perfect," he said, and his voice was steady even though his hands wanted to shake. "Your resonance stability is improving. Good work." "Told you. Easy." She stretched, popping her shoulders with the casual flexibility of youth. Shielding drills next. They ran through the shielding drills. Ino performed well, her mental barriers were strong, her responses quick, her technique solid. Inoichi tested her with standard probes, and she deflected each one cleanly. By the end of the session, Inoichi had convinced himself he'd been wrong. The behavioral changes were real, but they were normal. His daughter was growing up, making new friends, exploring her identity. All the terrifying, ordinary things that 12-year-olds did. His professional paranoia had painted a sinister pattern over innocent data, and he'd almost made the unforgivable mistake of treating his daughter like an intelligence target. He made a mental note to close the file on his desk. Then he hugged Ino, told her he was proud of her, and watched her bounce out of the training room with the energy of a girl who had places to be and people to see. The relief lasted all the way to his study, where he sat behind his desk and stared at the open file and felt, despite everything his scan had shown him, a cold, persistent whisper in the deepest part of his professional mind. It was too clean. He'd been doing resonance scans for 20 years. He'd scanned hundreds of minds, prisoners, patients, colleagues, family members. Every single one had shown something. Minor anomalies, stress markers, the inevitable imperfections of a living, messy human brain. No mind was perfectly clean. The very act of living left traces, irregularities, tiny deviations from the theoretical norm. Ino's scan had been flawless. Textbook. As if someone had cleaned the room before the inspector arrived, Inoichi stared at the file. The whisper grew louder, too clean. He didn't close the file. He picked up his pen and wrote, "Saturday scan negative findings. All patterns within normal parameters. No evidence of foreign influence." Then, after a long pause, "Recommend follow-up scan in 2 weeks. Different protocol. Deeper access." He closed the file, locked it in his desk drawer, and went to help his wife in the shop. The whisper didn't stop. Naruto learned the results of the scan from Ino on Monday. "Dad did the resonance thing Saturday," she said, sitting beside him on the roof. "It was fine, normal." He seemed relieved. "That's good, right? I guess. He's been less intense since then. Maybe he just needed to check and see that I'm okay." She paused, pulling at a thread on her sleeve. "Which I am, obviously." "Obviously," Naruto agreed. The dormancy protocol had worked. Inoichi's scan had found nothing because there was nothing to find. The threads had been invisible, dormant, coiled so tight within Ino's neural architecture that the most experienced mind reader in the village had looked right at them and seen only normal tissue. Naruto should have felt triumphant. The biggest threat to his operation had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Inoichi's guard was lowered. The way forward was clear. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. That night in the tunnels, he reactivated the threads. The process was simpler than putting them to sleep. A brief meditation. A pulse of chakra through the connection he maintained with Ino's neural network, and the threads uncoiled like flowers blooming. Within hours, they'd resume their work, picking up where they'd left off, continuing the steady, patient process of reshaping Ino Yamanaka into something she'd never chosen to be. But he modified them first. It was a small change, so small that the researcher would probably have dismissed it as negligible. Naruto adjusted the thread's influence patterns to incorporate a buffer around Ino's core personality. The wall in the garden would remain, but it would be thinner, more porous. The real Ino, trapped inside, would have slightly more influence on her own behavior. Not enough to break free, not enough to alert anyone, but enough to breathe. He told himself it was a strategic decision. A target with some access to their authentic personality was more convincing, less likely to trigger suspicion through behavioral flatness. The researcher's own notes supported this. A degree of host personality bleed-through enhances the modification's naturalistic quality. It was a strategic decision, completely rational, operationally justified. It had nothing to do with the fact that he could still feel her real self hammering against the wall, or that the sound of her trapped fury had followed him out of her mind and into his dreams and hadn't stopped. Nothing to do with that at all. Tuesday, Shikamaru was waiting for him, not on the roof, at the academy entrance, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, and his expression set in something that was not quite confrontation but was very much not casual. "Hey, Naruto?" "Hey, Shikamaru." "What's up? Can we talk?" Naruto's internal alarms fired simultaneously, but his external response was flawless, the slight widening of the eyes, the confused tilt of the head, the open, guileless expression of someone who had nothing to hide. "Sure, about what?" Shikamaru pushed off the wall and started walking. Not toward the classroom, toward the training yard, which was empty at this hour. Naruto followed, adjusting his pace to match the Nara's lazy amble while his mind raced through possibilities. He knows something. He doesn't know what he knows, but he knows something. This is a probe. He's going to ask questions, watch my reactions, and try to build a theory from whatever I give him. They reached the yard. Shikamaru stopped near the target range, turned, and looked at Naruto with an expression that was terrifyingly direct for someone who cultivated an image of terminal apathy. "What's going on with you and Ino?" "Going on? Nothing's going on. We're friends." "Since when?" "Since the assessment. We got paired, we worked well together, we started hanging out." "What's the big deal?" Shikamaru studied him. The Nara's eyes were dark, sharp, and utterly without the lazy glaze they usually wore. He was fully present, fully focused, and Naruto felt the weight of that intelligence like a physical pressure. "Ino doesn't make friends like that," Shikamaru said. "Not that fast, not with people she's ignored for 4 years. She's strategic about her relationships, careful, she doesn't just switch. Maybe she's changing. People change. People change gradually. This was sudden." Naruto maintained the confused expression, but behind it, he was recalibrating. Shikamaru wasn't guessing. He'd been building this theory for weeks, observing, analyzing, waiting for enough data to justify a confrontation. The fact that he was confronting Naruto directly meant he'd passed some internal threshold of certainty. The question was, what did he think was happening, not the truth? There was no way Shikamaru could have guessed the truth. Mind control Jutsu, using forbidden Yamanaka techniques, and Demon Fox chakra was so far outside the realm of normal possibility that even a genius wouldn't reach for it as a first hypothesis. He probably thought something simpler. A manipulation. A con, the village pariah targeting a clan heir for social advancement or access. Naruto could work with that. "Look, Shikamaru." He dropped the grin. Let his shoulders sag, manufactured vulnerability but calibrated differently than what he'd shown Ino. With Ino, he'd been the lonely boy asking for connection. With Shikamaru, he needed to be the lonely boy who was afraid of losing it. "I know what this looks like. The dead last nobody suddenly getting close to clan heir. You think I'm using her. You think I'm what? Trying to climb the social ladder? Get access to her family's techniques." The flicker in Shikamaru's eyes told Naruto he'd landed close to at least one of the boy's hypotheses. Good. A correct guess built credibility. I'm not, Naruto continued. She's the first person who's ever treated me like I'm worth something. That's it. That's the whole thing. I know it happened fast, and I know it looks weird from the outside, but, he paused, let his voice crack just slightly. Do you know what it's like to have no one, not one person? And then suddenly, someone sees you and talks to you and brings you food because she thinks you don't eat enough. Do you have any idea what that feels like? The silence stretched. Shikamaru's expression was unreadable, that particular Nara stillness that could mean anything from total acceptance to total rejection. I'm not accusing you of anything, Shikamaru said finally. His voice had shifted, still wary, still sharp, but with a thread of something softer. Not sympathy exactly, more like reluctant acknowledgement. I'm worried about Ino. She's changing fast, and I've known her my whole life, and something about this doesn't add up. What do you think doesn't add up? I don't know yet. That's what bugs me. Shikamaru shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. I don't have a theory, I just have a feeling, and my feelings are usually right. So what do you want me to do? Nothing. I'm not telling you to stay away from her. I'm telling you that I'm watching. The words hung in the air between them. A declaration, not a threat, but the difference was academic. Shikamaru Nara was watching, and a Nara who was watching was a Nara who would eventually see. Naruto held the boy's gaze and let his expression show exactly what Shikamaru expected to see. A lonely kid who was scared of losing his only friend, rattled by the confrontation but trying to stand his ground. It was a good performance. One of his best. Okay, Naruto said quietly. Watch all you want. You'll see that I'm just trying to have a friend, that's all. Shikamaru looked at him for a long moment, then something in his posture relaxed, not all the way, not even close, but enough. For what it's worth, the Nara said, turning to walk back toward the building. I hope you're telling the truth. So do I, Naruto thought, and was horrified to realize he meant it. Shikamaru walked away. Naruto stood in the empty training yard and stared at the targets, and felt the cold, careful architecture of his plan tremble under the weight of something it had never been designed to bear. He was running out of time. Shikamaru was watching. Inoichi was suspicious, despite the clean scan. The window of opportunity was narrowing with every day that passed. He needed to move to Stage 4. Now. And Stage 4 required something from Ino that she had never given anyone. It required her complete obedience. That afternoon, Naruto went to the tunnels and did not emerge for 2 days. He told no one. Skipped the academy, a common enough occurrence for the dead last that Iruka would mark it as another absence without investigation. Ino would notice, would worry, and that worry would serve the operation when he returned. For 2 days, he studied. Not the researcher's scrolls. He'd memorized those long ago. His own notes. The modifications he'd developed, the adjustments he'd made, the theoretical framework he'd built by combining the researcher's forbidden techniques with the Yamanaka theory Ino had shared with him. He was developing something new. Something the researcher hadn't imagined, because the researcher hadn't had the Nine-Tails chakra to work with. The threads, as designed, were limited. They could suggest, influence, nudge, and gradually reshape, but they operated within the target's existing psychological architecture. They couldn't create new desires from nothing. They couldn't generate loyalty where no foundation existed. They could only amplify, redirect, and modify what was already there. But the fox's chakra had properties that transcended normal limitations. It was alive in a way that standard chakra wasn't, ancient, aware, possessed of its own terrible intelligence. When Naruto wove fox chakra into his threads, they didn't just mimic the target's neural patterns. They learned them, adapted to them, evolved. What if the threads could do more than modify existing architecture? What if they could generate new structures, artificial neural pathways that produced genuine emotions, real loyalty, authentic devotion? Not mimicry, not suggestion. The actual neurological hardware of love and loyalty, built from scratch and installed directly into the target's brain. It would be, in every meaningful sense, real. Ino would feel it as real. Her brain would process it as real. No scan would detect it as foreign because it wouldn't be foreign. It would be organic neural tissue, grown from her own cells, guided into formation by threads that had dissolved into the architecture they created, undetectable, irreversible, complete. Naruto worked through the theory. Filled an entire notebook. Tested the chakra patterns on himself, using the fox's energy to grow microscopic neural structures in his own brain, and then examining them through meditation. They worked. The structures were stable, self-sustaining, and indistinguishable from natural tissue. He sat in the dark room, surrounded by scrolls and notes and the accumulated knowledge of a dead researcher's life's work, and held in his hands the most powerful and terrible weapon anyone had ever developed. If he used it on Ino, she would be his. Completely, permanently, genuinely. Not a puppet. Not a slave. A person who truly, organically loved and trusted and obeyed him, because the hardware for those feelings would be as real as any other part of her brain. The old Ino, the real Ino, the girl behind the wall, would be gone. Not killed. Absorbed. Integrated into the new architecture so thoroughly that the distinction between real and modified would cease to exist. It was, Naruto realized, the perfect crime. You couldn't free someone from chains they couldn't feel. You couldn't rescue someone from a prison they believed was home. He held the notebook in his lap and stared at the wall of the underground room and felt nothing. The cold clarity that had carried him through murder and manipulation, and 3 weeks of systematic psychological destruction, served him now as it always had a smooth, featureless shield between himself and the reality of what he was becoming. He would use the technique. He would advance to stage 4, then 5, then completion. Ino would be his agent, his ally, his weapon. Through her, he would access the Yamanaka library. Through the library, he would develop techniques that could be used on others. Through others, he would build a network of loyal, devoted servants who would help him reshape the village that had tried to destroy him. This was the plan. This had always been the plan. And no amount of flower-scented hair and genuine smiles, and the memory of arms holding him tight in a forest clearing, was going to change it. Naruto closed the notebook, extinguished the lamp, sat in the absolute darkness of the underground room, and listened to the silence, and the fox's breathing, and the faint, distant sound that might have been his own heart, or might have been the echo of fists beating against a garden wall. And somewhere above him, Ino Yamanaka sat in the academy during free period, on the roof where they always met, waiting for a boy who didn't come, and felt, for the first time in weeks, a sudden, piercing moment of clarity. The clarity lasted 3 seconds. Long enough for her to look at her own hands and see the orange ribbon on her wrist and think, with a shock that went through her like lightning, "Why am I wearing orange? I hate orange. I've always hated orange. Why do I?" The thread surged. The moment passed. Ino blinked, shook her head, and looked out at the village with eyes that were clear and calm and no longer entirely her own. She waited for Naruto. She wasn't sure why it mattered so much that he wasn't here. She just knew that it did. Below her, in the training yard, Shikamaru lay in the grass and watched the roof and thought and thought and thought. Chapter 4. Shadow Games. Shikamaru Nara had a board. Not a shogi board, though he had one of those too, sitting on his bedroom floor with a half-finished game against himself that he'd been picking at for a week. This board was different. This board was taped to the inside of his closet door, hidden behind hanging jackets and a strategically placed laundry basket, because if his mother found it, she'd either laugh at him or worry about him, and he wasn't sure which would be worse. The board was a sheet of butcher paper, borrowed from the kitchen without asking, covered in his own cramped handwriting. At the center was a name, Ino. Branching out from it in every direction were observations, dates, behaviors, questions. Lines connected related data points. Question marks flagged unknowns. A timeline ran along the bottom, marking the progression of changes he'd observed over the past 4 weeks. It looked, he reflected, exactly like the investigation boards his father kept in the Nara clan's strategy room. The ones Shikaku used to map enemy movements during wartime planning sessions, connecting disparate intelligence into coherent patterns. Shikamaru had never wanted to be like his father. Too much work, too much responsibility, too many people depending on your brain to save their lives. He'd planned to coast, graduate with minimum effort, become a middling chunin, play shogi, watch clouds, and die of old age in a comfortable bed. That plan was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. He stood in front of the board on Wednesday morning, still in his sleeping clothes, and traced the timeline with his finger. Week 1, Ino greets Naruto in the hallway. Week 2, assessment pairing, post-exercise lingering, first private conversation observed. Week 3, daily rooftop meetings, Ino brings food for Naruto, Ino defends Naruto publicly. Week 4, Ino shares clan theory with Naruto. This data point was flagged with 3 question marks. Shikamaru had overheard enough of their rooftop conversation to catch fragments about resonance and chakra frequency. Ino lies to her father about an after-school outing. Ino wears orange. The orange was what bothered him most. Not because a girl changing her color preferences was inherently alarming, but because Ino's aesthetic choices had always been deliberate, curated, expressive of a carefully constructed identity. Purple and blue, those were her colors, had been since she was old enough to choose. The sudden introduction of orange, spread across multiple accessories and personal items over a span of days rather than weeks, was not a natural drift in taste. It was a shift. Rapid, comprehensive, and pointed directly at the one person in their class who wore orange as a signature. Shikamaru didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in data, patterns, and the uncomfortable conclusions they sometimes pointed toward. His confrontation with Naruto 2 days ago had been inconclusive. The boy's responses had been emotionally convincing: the loneliness, the vulnerability, the desperate gratitude for friendship. Shikamaru hadn't detected deception in the conventional sense. No shifty eyes, no inconsistent details, no physiological signs of lying, but something had been off. Something in the precision of Naruto's emotional display. The exact right pause, the exact right crack in his voice, the exact right amount of vulnerability to disarm a challenger without appearing manipulative. It had been too good, too calibrated. Like a performance by someone who'd studied the art of appearing genuine, or like the authentic emotion of someone who'd genuinely been lonely his entire life. That was the problem. Both interpretations fit the data. Naruto was either exactly what he appeared to be, a damaged kid grateful for his first real friendship, or he was something else entirely, wearing that damage like a costume. Shikamaru needed more data, and to get it, he needed to do something he found profoundly troublesome. He needed to follow Naruto. Surveillance was not Shikamaru's specialty. He was a strategist, not a field operative. His skills were in analysis, planning, and the application of the Nara clan's shadow techniques to tactical problems. Tailing a target through a village without being detected required a different skill set. Patience, stealth, physical endurance, and the willingness to spend hours doing absolutely nothing while waiting for something to happen. He hated every part of that description. But he did it anyway, because the pattern on his closet door wasn't going to resolve itself, and Ino was his teammate, his oldest friend, and the girl who'd once punched Ami in the face for calling Choji fat, and he owed her at least this much effort. Wednesday after school. Naruto left the academy at his usual time, taking his usual route, the long way, through the market district. Shikamaru followed at a distance, using the crowd as cover, keeping Naruto's orange jacket in his peripheral vision without looking directly at it. The jacket was a tracking gift. Who wore that much orange in a village of earth tones and muted colors? It was like following a traffic cone. Naruto walked with his hands in his pockets, the loose-limbed amble of someone with nowhere to be. He bought a cup of instant ramen from a street vendor, who overcharged him. Shikamaru noticed that, filed it away under things that were messed up about this village. He paused at a store window and appeared to examine a display of kunai with the vacant interest of a window shopper. Normal. Boring. Exactly what Shikamaru expected from the Academy's dead last on a Wednesday afternoon. Naruto arrived at his apartment building, a rundown complex near the red light district that no 12-year-old should have been living in alone. He went inside. The door closed. Shikamaru waited. Found a spot in an alley across the street with a clear view of both the building entrance and Naruto's third-floor window. Sat down. Leaned against the wall. Prepared to be bored for several hours. 3 hours later, at approximately 6:30 p.m., the light in Naruto's window went out. Shikamaru straightened, watching. The building entrance remained closed. No one came out. He waited another 10 minutes. Nothing, then he moved. Not to the entrance, to the alley behind the building, where a fire escape offered access to the upper floors. He climbed to the third floor and looked through the window into Naruto's apartment, empty. The bed was undisturbed. The kitchen showed signs of recent use, a ramen cup on the counter, steam still faintly visible. But Naruto was gone. The front door hadn't opened. The window Shikamaru was looking through was the only one on this side of the building, and it was latched from the inside. The apartment had no other exits visible from the exterior, which meant Naruto had left through a route Shikamaru couldn't see. A hidden exit, or a skill set that allowed him to move through the building without using the conventional paths. Shikamaru's frown deepened. Dead last students didn't have hidden exits or advanced movement skills. Dead last students went home, ate ramen, and watched TV until they fell asleep. He filed the observation subject has undisclosed means of exiting his apartment undetected and climbed back down, Thursday. Same routine. Naruto went to school, talked to Ino on the roof. Shikamaru watched from the building across the street using a pair of binoculars he'd borrowed. From his father's equipment closet. Walked home, entered his apartment, and vanished. This time, Shikamaru was ready. He'd positioned himself on a rooftop with a sightline to every face of Naruto's building. If the boy left through a window, a vent, or a previously unknown door, Shikamaru would see it. At 6:45 p.m., the light went out. Shikamaru watched. Every window, every wall, every shadow. At 6:52, a figure emerged from the roof. Not through a door, through a hatch that Shikamaru hadn't known existed, concealed beneath a weathered tarp that looked like it had been there for years. The figure moved across the rooftop with a fluid, silent grace that bore absolutely no resemblance to the stumbling class clown who'd tripped over his own feet in the academy yard that morning. It crossed to the building's edge, paused for a fraction of a second, and then leaped to the next rooftop. And the next. And the next. Shikamaru watched Naruto Uzumaki move across the rooftops of Konoha with a speed and skill that would have been impressive in a chunin. He covered 100 meters in under 30 seconds, his movements precise, economic, practiced. This wasn't raw athleticism. This was trained technique, refined through repetition, the kind of skill that took months or years of dedicated practice to develop. The deadlast couldn't do this. The deadlast could barely climb a rope. Shikamaru's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline of discovery. The pattern was cracking open, and what he saw beneath it was nothing like what he'd expected. He followed. Not across the rooftops, he didn't have the skill for that, and attempting it would give him away. Instead, he tracked Naruto's trajectory from the street, sprinting between cover points, keeping the moving figure in sight through gaps between buildings. Naruto was heading northwest. Toward the Hokage Monument, Shikamaru lost him at the base of the monument. One moment the orangeless figure, he'd changed clothes, Shikamaru realized, dark shirt, dark pants, no identifying colors, was moving along the monument's western face. The next moment it was gone, swallowed by the rock itself as if the mountain had opened up and taken him in. Shikamaru stood in the shadow of a supply shed and stared at the spot where Naruto had disappeared. His chest was heaving, his legs aching from the sprint, and his brain was running at a speed that usually only happened during shogi matches against his father. He went into the monument. There's an entrance, hidden, probably sealed, definitely not on any map I've ever seen. He goes there at night. He's been going there for How long? Weeks? Months? He's not what he pretends to be. He's never been what he pretends to be. The implications cascaded through Shikamaru's mind like dominoes falling. If Naruto was hiding his true abilities, if the dead last persona was a deliberate fabrication maintained for years, then everything Shikamaru thought he knew about the boy was wrong. And if everything was wrong, then the pattern with Ino wasn't a lonely kid making a friend. It was something else, something planned. Shikamaru's legs gave out. He sat down hard against the supply shed wall, breathing through the surge of adrenaline and fear and awful, terrible certainty. Ino. He had to tell someone. Inoichi. The Hokage. Someone with the authority and ability to investigate what was happening beneath the monument and what Naruto might be doing to his oldest friend. But tell them what? That the class dead last could run across rooftops and had disappeared into a mountain. That was suspicious, yes, but it wasn't evidence of anything specific. Shikamaru didn't have proof. He had observations and a pattern and a feeling in his gut that was screaming at him with an intensity that made his teeth ache. He needed proof. Concrete, undeniable, impossible to dismiss proof. And to get it, he needed to follow Naruto into the mountain. The entrance took Shikamaru 2 days to find. He returned to the monument's western face on Friday night, armed with a flashlight, a kunai, and a level of determination that would have astonished anyone who knew him. He searched the rock face centimeter by centimeter, feeling for irregularities, looking for the crack or gap or hidden mechanism that Naruto had used. Nothing. The rock was solid, seamless, unyielding. If there was an entrance, it was concealed by something more sophisticated than physical camouflage, seals. It had to be seals. Shikamaru wasn't a seal expert. But his father was a strategist who worked closely with the village's barrier team. And the Nara clan library contained a section on Jutsu theory that Shikamaru had browsed exactly once, during a rainy afternoon when he had nothing else to do, and had retained with the effortless totality of a brain that forgot nothing it found interesting. Concealment seals worked by bending light and chakra around an object, making it invisible to both optical and sensory detection. They were common on high-security installations and could be circumvented by anyone who knew the fundamental principle. Concealment seals hid things from active perception, but they couldn't hide from passive awareness. If you stopped trying to see the entrance and instead let your peripheral vision do the work, the seal's effect weakened. Shikamaru stood in front of the rock face, closed his eyes, emptied his mind, and then opened them with his focus deliberately softened. Not looking at the rock, looking past it. Through it, letting his eyes receive information without actively processing it, there, at the edge of his unfocused vision. A shadow that didn't belong, a thin dark line in the rock, vertical, maybe 3 feet tall and 1 foot wide. A crack. When he turned to look at it directly, it disappeared. When he relaxed his focus, it reappeared. A sealed entrance, hidden in plain sight. Shikamaru approached it sideways, keeping the crack in his peripheral vision. His hand found the edge of the opening, real stone, but with a gap behind it just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. He hesitated. What he was about to do was dangerous in ways he couldn't fully calculate. He didn't know what was inside. He didn't know what Naruto was doing in there. He didn't know if there were traps, defenses, or things he wasn't prepared to encounter. I should tell someone. This is beyond me. I'm 12. He thought about Ino. About the orange ribbon and the marigold and the way she looked at Naruto now, with that layered intensity that was so unlike her, so wrong in ways he couldn't articulate but felt in his bones. He went in. The crack led to a passage. The passage led to stairs. The stairs led down. Shikamaru descended in darkness, one hand on the wall, his flashlight off because light would announce his presence. The air grew cool, then cold. The stone beneath his fingers was covered in something old seals, he realized, running his fingertips over raised ridges that formed patterns too complex to read by touch. The stairs ended. A corridor stretched ahead, utterly black, the air still and heavy with age. Shikamaru moved forward by feel, step by careful step, his heart hammering so loud he was sure anyone within 50 meters could hear it. He walked for what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes. The corridor branched, left, right, straight. He took the left branch because the air moved slightly, suggesting an opening ahead. Another corridor, another junction. He was in a labyrinth and he was already lost. This was stupid. This was the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I once let Choji convince me to eat a whole ghost pepper on a dare. He kept going. The left-hand rule, always follow the left wall, would eventually lead him back to the entrance or to a dead end. Either way, he'd find something or find his way out. The left wall led him to a door, not a real door, a section of wall that felt different from the surrounding stone. Smoother. Warmer. When he pressed his palm against it, he felt a faint vibration, like the hum of a machine operating just beyond perception, a chakra-locked door. He couldn't open it without the right signature, but he could listen through it. Shikamaru pressed his ear to the warm stone and held his breath. Silence. Deep, complete silence. If there was a room beyond the door, it was either empty or its occupant was perfectly still. He waited. Counted to 100, 200. Nothing. Either Naruto wasn't here tonight or the tunnels were larger than Shikamaru had guessed, and this wasn't the right room. Either way, he'd pushed as far as he could without the tools to go further. He retraced his steps, following the left wall in reverse, and emerged from the crack in the rock face 40 minutes later, breathing hard, covered in dust, and vibrating with the kind of intellectual adrenaline that he imagined other people felt during physical combat. He'd found Naruto's secret. Not the whole thing, not yet, but the container. A hidden tunnel system beneath the Hokage monument, concealed by seals, accessible only to someone who knew it was there. Whatever Naruto was doing, he was doing it underground, in a space that had been deliberately hidden from the village. Shikamaru walked home through empty streets, his mind ablaze. He needed resources. He needed help. And he needed to figure out how to open that door, but first, before any of that, he needed to do something about Ino, Friday morning. Shikamaru found her before school, intercepting her at the academy gate with a directness that was, for him, practically aggressive. "We need to talk." Ino looked at him. The morning sun was in her eyes, and she squinted slightly, which made her look annoyed even before she had reason to be. "Good morning to you too, Shikamaru." About Naruto. The change was instant, not dramatic. Ino was too controlled for dramatic, but unmistakable. Her posture shifted, her chin came up. Her eyes, which had been open and mildly irritated, went flat and guarded. "What about him?" "Something's wrong, Ino. The way you've been acting, the changes, it's not normal. And before you tell me I'm overthinking it, I want you to actually listen." She crossed her arms. "I'm listening. 4 weeks ago, you didn't know Naruto existed. Now he's the center of your social life. You eat lunch with him instead of us. You wear his color. You share clan knowledge with him, don't deny it. I heard enough of your rooftop conversations to know. You've lied to your father about where you spend your time." Each point landed visibly, small flinches, quickly suppressed, like someone being poked in a bruise they'd forgotten they had. Ino's expression hardened with every sentence. "I followed him, Ino. Tuesday and Thursday night. He goes to the Hokage monument after dark. There are tunnels underneath it, hidden, sealed. He's doing something down there that he doesn't want anyone to know about." He paused, letting the weight of the information settle. Ino's face was unreadable now, locked down, defensive, the emotional equivalent of a castle pulling up its drawbridge. "You followed him," she said. Her voice was cold. Not Ino cold, the playful frost she used on people who annoyed her. Actually cold, the temperature of real anger. "Yes. You followed my friend, spied on him, and now you're standing here telling me there's something wrong with me because I'm nice to someone." "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said. You said I'm acting weird because I made a friend. You said my behavior isn't normal. You said I'm lying to my dad." Her voice rose incrementally, each sentence carrying more heat than the last. "Did it ever occur to you, Shikamaru, that maybe I changed because I wanted to? That maybe I'm tired of being the same person I was when I was 8. That maybe, just maybe, Naruto is actually a good person and I actually enjoy spending time with him. Ino. No, you don't get to do this. She stepped forward, and for a moment she was the Ino he'd always known, fierce, certain, uncompromising. But there was something beneath it, something Shikamaru could see with the piercing clarity of long familiarity. A tremor. A hairline fracture in the certainty, as if part of her was fighting to say something different and couldn't quite break through. You don't get to decide who my friends are, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, a fracture so small that only someone who'd known her since before she could talk would have heard it. He heard it. I'm not trying to decide anything, Shikamaru said. He kept his voice low, steady, the opposite of her rising intensity. I'm trying to help you. I don't need help. I need you to mind your own business.